Hello to the people that are watching on YouTube. This is the first time we're live streaming this as well, so thanks to Aiden, and shout out to Aiden and Patrick for setting up the live stream, and to Ram's Head for hosting us. All right, a couple quick housekeeping things. This is also the shortest one of these events we've ever done, so I'm gonna try to get through this so we can get to the content. But housekeeping things, bathrooms are in the back where it says restrooms. There's an exit there, and I guess there's an exit over here. There's a sign. So if the place catches on fire, find the exits. We've got freebies and some t-shirts and stuff for sale up in the corner. If anybody wants to get some swag, you guys can sit down. You're making me nervous. And I can just say again, thanks to Ram's Head, and if you're looking for lunch afterwards, they've got a great restaurant and a little beer pub next door, so check them out for lunch. All right, quickly about us. That's me and August earlier this summer. We had both boats in Bergen, where August lives and where Eastbjorn is based. We have a Far 65 and a Swan 48, and we take people ocean sailing. That's been our thing since 2015. We had a third boat for a while before we got the Far, so all three boats that we've used in 10 seasons of sailing have covered 140,000 miles offshore, which is pretty amazing. Not all of them with me on it, but lots of them with Mia and I on it. We have a leaderboard on our sort of back end, and I think I've done close to 70,000 miles with 59 North. Mia's second with, I think, 50, and August, you're bringing up the rear, because you only started with us in 2019, so. Pretty cool photo there of the difference in size. You get used to the bigger boats. You think Eastbjorn's a big boat when you first get on it, and then you look at Eastbjorn next to Falcon, and it's like, a big difference. But it's a lot of fun what we do, and I know a lot of you have sailed with us in the past, and many of you are signed up to sail with us in the future. We're going to the Pacific next year, so super excited about that. I'll let Brady and Blue introduce themselves, but we have a history. We sailed to Svalbard with Brady and Blue, or sailed in Svalbard with them and the rest of the DELOS crew back in 2018, and actually did our film screening here of that movie when it first came out. If you haven't seen it, it's called 80 North. I think it's on Amazon now, right? Yeah, so check that out. That was our history with Brady and Blue, and now they're doing more sail training type stuff like us, so we thought, all right, let's do something like this together. All right, here's how today's gonna go. I'm gonna give you about an hour on offshore essentials. We're gonna have a quick break to turn around and turn over to Brady and Blue. They're gonna give you an hour on cruising essentials, more liveaboard type stuff, because we barely ever stop the boats when we're sailing. And then we're gonna have a 15-minute break, because we're gonna set up the stage for a panel discussion, where I'm gonna moderate a panel with all 5 of us, plus Heather, one of Brady and Blue's skippers. And we're gonna kinda go into a little more detail on all this stuff, and then give you guys a chance to ask questions. Speaking of which, if you have not yet submitted questions, and if you have questions today, don't raise your hand, it slows down the process. Submit your questions throughout the day. If you have your phone with you, go to 59-north.com/questions, and there's a little form there, and if you want a question, and then during the break when we're setting up the stage, we'll go through and pick the best questions, and then we'll answer them during the Q&A at the end. And then we're gonna be out of here by 1:30. So those of you that wanna get to the boat show, I hope to get you out of here by 1:30. Ram's Head has a concert in here tonight, so we have to be out of here. And those of you that are gonna go to the show, we've got a booth just opposite Cruisers Academy, so come and say hi to us in the show. And last but not least, we've got a big party tonight. I know a lot of you are coming. If you're not, it's $20, fundraiser for Matt Rutherford's Ocean Research Project. It's going to be over in Eastport at J World starting at 5 o'clock with, it's $20, but you get beer and food when you get in. So hope to see a lot of you there later on today. All right. Hang on a second. My phone is talking to me in my pocket. I was like, where is that echo coming from? I'm hearing myself in my pocket from the live stream. Jeez. Thank you. All right. That was weird. Okay, offshore essentials. Normally, I would take like 3 days to go through all the things that I'm gonna go through in about 45 minutes. So I'm gonna try to keep this almost a little bit more like meta. Like I'm gonna teach you how to learn instead of actually teaching you what you need to know. I will cover some of that stuff as well, but given the interest of what we're trying to do today, I wanna start this by talking about sort of my philosophy of seamanship. And August and I have developed this with our quarterdeck platform over the years, where if you distill down what seamanship is, because it encompasses literally everything there is to need to know about running a boat, coastal or offshore. But to me, what seamanship really boils down to is learning how to anticipate and learning how to adapt. And if you can remember those things throughout, it's just a nice way to sort of reframe what you're trying to figure out. And we can also break seamanship down into two areas. You can learn it and you can earn it. So that hopefully is obvious, but learning it is the study. It's what you guys are doing right here, and it's what I'm going to give you some tips on to go home and how and where you can learn stuff through book knowledge, and then you can go earn it by actually doing it. Now, I asked Brady this a minute ago. I was like, I'm going to make a little joke kind of about DELOS here, because I think the early days, DELOS, they were one of the early pioneers of the sailing YouTube thing, and that's created this huge culture, which has been really great for sailing. But I think some people have said it's felt like permission to go learn sort of how to sail the Captain Ron way. Like, hey, if anything's going to happen, it's going to happen out there. And I actually think there's a better way to do it, and I think it's really cool that that's what Brady and Blue have kind of pivoted to now with their sailing school, because during their time on DELOS, they're like, well, we're the ones that are teaching everyone, and there's clearly a need for this, so we really like the teaching thing, let's go do that. So my point with this is, like, yes, you can go out and make a fool of yourself and do things the sort of the hard way, but there's a better way to do it, and that's through learning how to do it. And you guys, I think, get that. This is why you're here. And a little sort of lecture here on learning. August and I still, and I'm speaking for us, but Mia is included in this as well, but I think August and I take it to another level. We read everything, and there's so much you can learn through reading, not just like the boring textbooks. And I'll use like Nigel Calder's example, his book, Mechanical and Electrical Maintenance or something. It's like the driest title ever. It's a really, really great book, and everybody should have it on their bookshelves. But you can learn so much from these classic narratives as well. I have Moitessier on the screen here. He's my favorite of all the authors. And it's really cool when you read his narratives. He writes in such flowery prose, and so you're caught up in the story. But if you actually pay attention and read it 2 or 3 or 4 times and read between the lines, you can learn a ton. And a really cool example of that is Moitessier actually learning something as he's writing it. And there was a book called Cape Horn, The Logical Route. It's actually my favorite of Moitessier's books. Most people cite The Long Way as his best. But Cape Horn, The Logical Route, he's in a storm in the Southern Ocean. His wife's on board. They were going from, I think, New Zealand or French Polynesia around the Horn back to France. And they were at sea. At the time, it became like the longest small boat voyage ever accomplished. But they're in a storm in the Southern Ocean, and he's writing about how the boat, his ketch Joshua, was really getting slowed down by these waves. He had a warp streaming out the back. He had drogues. He was trying to slow the boat down, and the boat just wasn't responding, and he was having a hard time keeping the stern to the waves, and he was afraid the boat was going to capsize. And in that moment, he remembered something that he had read by this guy, Vito Dumas, who was an Argentinian solo sailor that basically went around the world in the Southern Ocean and never trailed warps, never slowed the boat down, just kept sailing. And Moitessier cuts the ropes, and he's very dramatic in how he writes this, and all of a sudden Joshua comes alive. But it's an example of what I'm talking about, and he gets credit. Moitessier gets credit in the book Heavy Weather Sailing for like inventing this technique. But he didn't invent it. He learned it from Vito Dumas. And Vito Dumas's book, Alone Through the Roaring Forties, is where he got that from. So I just think that's a really cool example of like, even the people that we sort of revere, they're doing their own learning in this same sort of way. So next time you pick up your favorite book or even a narrative book, and I have a photo of Mia and John Kretschmer here that we met. We've been friends with John. He's been a mentor for a while. He's like the best modern example of this. Most of John's books, some of them are explicitly about seamanship. Others are just stories, but all of them have really, really interesting nuggets in there if you're just paying enough attention. And I actually think that's the best way to learn, more so than a textbook, is find a book that's really interesting to read and just read it really carefully, and what can you learn from that? Another example of that is Hal Roth. He's probably the best blend of like narrative, flowery prose, but also practical information. And just this book alone, How to Sail Around the World, is a great, great starting point for like, okay, I want to learn this stuff, but I actually want to find it interesting while I'm doing it. All right, I asked everybody before this to talk about what matters versus what doesn't matter when it comes to planning an offshore voyage. Mia and I did a workshop here in Annapolis in the spring where we kind of brainstormed this. The beginning of the workshop was like, okay, what do you think matters? What do you think matters? Coffee was high on the list, and that really does matter. What do we have? Weather understanding, sail plan and sail inventory, keeping water out of the boat, maintenance and reliability. This is a combination of what we brainstormed in the spring and what you guys sent in prior to this workshop. Skill, boat condition, navigation, provisioning, having enough food, electrical system, water, safety equipment, medical, comms, tools, inventory, rigging, steering. A lot of things that matter. Aiden looked at this last night. Aiden's doing our live stream, and he said, hot take that you put sail material doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Some of the stuff that you think matters doesn't matter. And like being that we're doing this at the boat show, the entire boat show down there, every single exhibit is trying to convince you that what they're selling really, really matters. And 99% of it doesn't matter. And I want to focus today on the things that do matter, why they matter, and why the things don't matter. I'll give a quick example of that to use Aiden's sail material as an example. August is going to give the sort of a 10 or 15-minute segment here on maintenance. But if you have something that is designed and maintained for the purpose, it can be a whole bunch of different materials. That applies to the sail, to the boat. You know, a fiberglass boat can be just as seaworthy as a wooden boat, as a carbon fiber boat, as a ferro cement boat. What really matters is not the choice of material, but actually how it's maintained and how it's designed. The biggest thing that we're going to dive a little deeper on today that matters is actually skill. And my favorite example of kind of the more skilled the sailor, the sort of less forgiving the boat, is my friend Matt Rutherford. Sailed around the Americas in 309 days alone, first and only person ever to do this, and he did it on a 27-foot dumpster dived Albin Vega. And the boat was a piece of shit, and like he had no margins for error. He had a hand-operated water maker. He had a diesel fuel bladder on the floor. I mean, it was a mess. I helped him get the boat ready here in Annapolis, and we were here when he came back. But like Matt's a very, very, very skilled sailor, and he was able to do that. So skill really matters, and it also matters in the decisions that you make. Like you might, and this is like a kind of counter to, again, what the boat show is trying to sell. There's a huge catamaran exhibit down there, a lot of which are performance catamarans. Well, if you don't know what you're doing, you can very easily get yourself in trouble on these high-performance multi-hulls because the loads are high, they're fast, they can capsize more easily. But if you do know what you're doing, there's nothing wrong with that. So kind of having an understanding of where you are at in your own skill level to then help that define how you make decisions. I was talking with someone at the booth yesterday about what's the mission. What is your mission and where are you at relative to that, and how do you make those decisions? So I've kind of boiled this down to like 6 sort of rules that if we're really going to be sort of at the basic level here, what are those 6 rules? Number 1, skills. I love that quote. It's from Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia. The more you know, the less you need. So again, it starts with what this really starts with is knowledge, and then from that is skill. I can't teach you the skills right now. That's what we do on the boats. That's what Brady and Alex do at Cruises Academy. That's the hands-on stuff. But the point is to practice those skills. And that's everything from sail handling to navigation. You're probably not going to need to learn Celestial. It's just a fun slide. I love teaching Celestial, but learning how to helm, one of the things that if you're double-handing your boat, you will have an autopilot. You will have to have an autopilot to do a long-distance passage. But you have to accept that that autopilot might fail. So if you've never hand-steered a boat downwind in big seas and not accidentally jibed, that's a skill that you need to practice. These guys are this is a higher level skill. We do a racing program as well. Nikki Henderson does a racing program. And that's a great way to like accelerate your learning with skills is like, okay, now you're pushing the boat as fast as you can for a couple days. Going aloft, that's something that nobody does, but like if you can't go aloft on your own boat at the dock or at sea, like you have no business going offshore. That's a skill that you can practice. And that's probably one I would say is something that is often ignored and like really, really critical because sometimes you have to go aloft to do something. If you've never done it before, it is exciting at sea. We carry on Falcon, we carry a climber's helmet, a climbing harness. We usually wear a life jacket, like an actual foam padded life jacket, because when you're up at the top of the rig and the boat's moving around, the stakes are much higher. Alex, one of our skippers, did the Clipper race when he was 19 years old, and he has a horror story. If you've listened to the podcast I did with him sometime last year, he was stuck up the rig in the Southern Ocean on a Clipper boat for 4 hours and thought he was going to die. The halyards got tangled up. He couldn't get down. Nobody could come up and get him. And I mean, that kind of thing is no bueno. So again, I can't go into too much detail, but skills is practice that stuff before you go offshore. Like the first time you go aloft shouldn't be when you are at sea. The first time you're sailing downwind in big seas shouldn't be the first time that you've gone offshore. So do that practice. Comms. This is interesting because now with Starlink, everybody has access to high-speed internet. This is a little bit philosophical, but whether you have Starlink on the boat or not doesn't mean you have a well-thought-out comms system. Comms, to me, offshore, has to be usable in a real emergency. And what that means is if you've got to get off the boat and into a life raft, you can't take Starlink with you. So quite simply, we've been using the same Iridium handset technology since like 2011. It's even older than that. But we've had the same handset that Mia and I had on our tourist going across the Atlantic. We still have it on Falcon. We keep 2 spare batteries charged up in a Pelican case, and that phone is there. We can pick it up, call the doctor. We can take it with us in the life raft, and it's tried and true. It's going to work. And nowadays, it's not that expensive. It's something that you should have. Everybody should have in their ditch bag. Iridium Go is another example that kind of was the Starlink example before Starlink. People thought, all right, if I have Iridium Go, I don't need to have a handset. And Iridium Go works really great. August used it on Eastbjorn. We have it on Falcon as well. It works awesome for downloading GRIB files, for sending emails and text messages. We use it now for tracking. So the maps gets the position reports from the Iridium Go. But again, to actually make a phone call with Iridium Go, you have to connect it to your phone. You're adding layers of technology, and if that goes in the life raft with you, you might not actually make it work. So think about that in terms of being offshore. You have to be able to communicate in a worst-case scenario. And most often, the worst-case scenario is not going to be, getting in the life raft. It might be a medical emergency, in which case there is a pretty good argument for Starlink because now you can actually FaceTime with a doctor and actually have a little bit more security there. But that still doesn't go with you in the life raft. Next thing that really matters, sail plan. You've got to be ready for anything from that kind of light wind sailing, light air. I think Hal Roth used to say that everybody worries about heavy weather, but 75 to 80% of the time, you're actually wishing you had more wind. So most people get the boat set up for heavy weather, but they forget about light weather, particularly if you're doing long-distance cruising routes that are going to be downwind. You get a lot of light weather downwind sailing where you actually wish you had more sails. So this is an example of have the boat set up for both light air and heavy air and know how to use it. We fly huge. That symmetric kite on Falcon is 3,000 square feet. It's giant. And we have a crew of 10. It's actually pretty easy to handle with 10 people. But if you've never flown a spinnaker before, that's back to the skill set thing. Go practice. Learn how to do that from someone that knows how to do it. Have your boat set up so that you can do it because when it's light weather going across the Atlantic, you're going to want it. Conversely, heavy weather, you've got to have the right setup for heavy weather because you might never use it. We have a storm trysail on Falcon. We've never used it. But if we need it, it's there, and we've practiced with it. And the way I think about a sail plan for a proper offshore boat is you got to have at least 2 head sails. And that can either be 1 head sail on your furthest most furler and an inner forestay with a removable hank-on staysail or storm jib or whatever. And then your mainsail with a minimum 3 reefs, maybe a storm trysail or not. I'm actually not in the trysail camp. I think a mainsail with 3 or even 4 reefs is a lot easier to handle excuse me, than setting up a trysail. But you got 3 reefs in your mainsail, a staysail, a storm jib, and then your primary Genoa or larger jib. And if you have less than that, if you go to sea with, most of these production boats have a main and a jib. If you go to sea with just 1 head sail, A, you're not going to have the right sail for varying conditions, and B, if anything happens to that 1 head sail, now you have no second head sail. So at a minimum, an inner forestay with a staysail that's good for heavy weather is like the minimum requirements for a good sail plan. And this is what it can look like in really heavy weather. This is the first time we sailed Falcon ever. After a year in the shed, we did a sea trial with the staff. And that's Mia there behind all that spray. We had 50 knots of wind in the English Channel in January. I mean, that's what you want on a sea trial. I should say also too, like, sea trial your boats, go do this, seek this out. We were looking for this. We came back, we had a list. The boat was actually sinking during the sea trial. I think this is one of the stories we told in the video that we made for this. We found that we had installed these like slatting panels against the hull to prevent condensation, and they drilled right through the hull in several places below the waterline. The one was right at the waterline, so we didn't notice it until we took the boat sailing, and we're on port tack, the boat's heeled to starboard, and like we're kind of, you know, there's a lot of water in the bilge. We're like, what the hell? So we're looking at all the lockers, and we open up one of the lockers, and there's this little pea stream of water just shooting straight up into, and ironically, we had, for some reason, just shoved a bucket in this locker, and it was perfectly shooting straight into the bucket, and the bucket had overflowed and filled the bilge with water, and it's just like, okay, somebody put your finger over that and just sit there for a couple days. So it took us 3 tries to launch the boat and take it out of the water before we found all the leaks. And there were 2 examples of having drilled through the hole. A couple through hulls leaked. So the point with this sea trial thing, I'm getting a little off the sail plan here, but most people, and we're guilty of this as well sometimes, where you have this boat that you've taken a long time to outfit, and then you never practice with it. You're just like, hey, go. We used to see this all the time. Me and I used to run the Caribbean 1500. That was the rally that went from here to Tortola. And people would spend the whole summer getting their boats ready, and then the first time they used all this new equipment was on the passage. And then you get all sorts of things that break and that don't work properly. And you got to have time to do that. We had this one sea trial with Falcon because everything got delayed, as it does, but we still did it, and we had a lot of things that we had to fix. Another fun story from that, this is back to sail plan. In the middle of the night, we were shaking a reef in the mainsail, and we have a big grinding pedestal on Falcon in the middle of the boat. We're going to hoist the mainsail up, and all of a sudden it got heavy, and that mainsail's like 350 pounds or something, so it's pretty heavy anyway. But it got heavier, and then bang. And we had actually pulled the headboard right out of the top of the mainsail because the halyard got stuck on something as we're going aloft. And then on examination, it's like, all right, this headboard was way underbuilt anyway, so we sent it back to the sailmaker, they put a new one on, and that's what's been on there since, and we've done 30,000 miles since then on Falcon. All right. Another thing that matters, this is Mia's department. She does the food lists for all the trips, and she's created this menu book of I think it's up to 25 different meals now for what we cook offshore. But this is kind of, it seems like an obvious one, but if you can't feed the crew, they're not gonna function. And there was a story from the ARC rally that we were working on, I don't know, this is 2012 or something. And the ARC rally goes from the Canary Islands to the Caribbean. And one of the boats had lost their refrigeration, and they had a week to go. And they had emailed Rally Control. They said, hey, we have a problem. We're out of food. We're like, what do you mean you're out of food? Well, our fridge broke. It's like, well, you didn't think to pack other food that doesn't have to be refrigerated? Well, no, why would we do that? So all their fridge food, and they're in the tropics, went bad, and they actually had to rendezvous with another boat to get provisions for the last week of their trip. So it's not just as simple as hey, yeah, we need to think about what to put on the boat. It's all right, we need to think about all these contingencies. What happens if the fridge goes out? What happens if you run out of propane? Do you have enough food that you don't need to cook? An interesting thing that this brings up is the coupling of systems. So everybody's going to lithium batteries now, and that's great. We have lithium on Eastbjorn and Falcon and on our personal boat. And then with lithium, a lot of people are doing induction cooking, induction stovetop or electric oven. Also great. But now you've coupled your cooking to your battery system, which in itself is coupled to the charging system. So you have all these sort of, they say accidents are never just one thing. It's always a chain of events. Well, not that this food thing is a major emergency, but if you've got lithium and induction, if all of a sudden you can't charge your batteries, now you can't cook. and you think about this, we think about this all the time in outfitting for ocean sailing, is how can we decouple the systems? And what we've done on Falcon, and on Eastbjorn for that matter, is lithium is more prone to a abrupt failure, because it's called a blackout, where if the parameters that the batteries can operate under get out of whack, the BMS shuts them off, and now you lose everything that's connected to electricity. So if you're shorthanded and you've got an autopilot that's running on electricity, and you get a blackout on your batteries, now you don't have an autopilot. So what we've done is we have a lithium bank, we have a AGM bank, and there's two separate banks. The AGM bank runs the autopilot, the nav lights, the chart plotter, all the critical stuff. So you kind of have a buffer between the lithium and the AGM. It sounds complicated. It's actually quite simple, but it's in an effort to decouple as many systems as possible so that when you do have a failure somewhere, it doesn't have cascading effects. This actually happened in Greenland last year, where we were pulling up the anchor to go offshore to Iceland, and we have Falcon set up, just like I said. The windlass is on the house side, on the lithium side, but everything in the cockpit is on the AGM side. So we pulled up the anchor, and like the anchor with 6 feet to go was hanging in the water, got stuck. And I thought the windlass breaker had just kicked. So we pulled the anchor up by hand the rest of the way, and I said, all right, we'll get the anchor lashed down, we'll sort this out on the way out. Because at the helm, nobody noticed anything happened. So we're motoring out this fjord, and James the sailorman, shout out to James, who was on and filmed a YouTube series of that. He goes down below and he's like, hey, half the electrical panel's out. I was like, oh, I know what that means. And that was, we had a blackout on the BMS side, because what had happened, it wasn't actually the windlass breaker that failed, it was the BMS had an overload and shut off the entire house side. So that worked as it should, and we went back around, re-anchored, and it was just a fuse that I had to change. Got back up and running, and off we went. But my point being, the point I'm making about provisions here, again, is use this as an example to decouple as many things as you can, and think about, if one thing happens, what's going to happen then, and then, and then, and then, and have that way of thinking, like, how can I break that chain of events through whatever you're doing or how you set the boat up. All right, I've been kind of giving these sort of summaries here in order of increasing importance. And I'm going to invite August up on stage to talk about maintenance. We've got this one and we've got one more to cover, which I think are two of the most important parts of, if we look at seamanship as anticipating and adapting, how can we apply that to maintenance? And then the last part that I'll cover at the end. August, take it away.
All right, thank you very much, Andy. No doubt you gave this to me because it's the most fun part of boat ownership is maintenance, and arguably one of the most important parts. So get the slides up here. I love books, as we talked about, and one of my favorite genres is shipwreck stories. And you know, they're exciting. They keep us on our toes, and it's remarkable how often the killer turns out to be just a tiny, tiny piece of gear that's been neglected, that starts the dominoes toppling over, and suddenly you have a massive disaster on your hands. And maintenance is the way to prevent those kind of things. It might sound like a chore, might feel a little kind of a necessary evil of the sailing part of things, but it really is a superpower if you think about it. You can, with very minimal effort often, you can prevent future disasters on your trips, on your boats. Kind of like going back in time and killing Hitler. It's really, that's how impactful it can be. Like I've been many times just like rolling around the bilges of my boats trying to fix something, and you think like, God damn it, if I only had 10 minutes at a stationary power dock, this could have been fixed in no time. And that is an option. Like you can actually do that if you just do it ahead of time. So it's really important to take this seriously. Cool. So how do we do it then? Planning, schedule your maintenance. Super important. I was at a dentist a little while back, and as I was heading out, paid at the reception, they asked me, "Hey, do you want to go ahead and book an appointment for next year?" And I was like, I was a little bit in a hurry. I didn't know what I was going to do next year. I said, I'll just book it, you know, when the time comes. was like 3 years ago now. And if you don't plan this stuff, it's going to slip through the cracks, and you're going to forget. And you're going to forget that you forgot, and things are going to break. It's bad. So what do you do? Again, this is it's a short, effective session, and I don't have time to tell you everything you need to do and maintain on your boat. But it really cooks down to monitoring your gear and your boat and just looking at things, smelling things, touching things. That's how you keep track of stuff. It's also one of the best arguments to clean your boat. Not that the cleanliness itself is going to do that much, but the act of cleaning, that's where you find all of this stuff. That's where you find the little leaks, the little cracks, the lost bolts and nuts that's missing from somewhere. And that's how you catch these things early. That's what maintenance is all about. Catching these things early, getting to the Hitlers before they grow up, so to speak, and cause any trouble. And I had the last offshore race I did is the Shetland race. We had horrible weather. It was really terrible. And the last boat that made it across to Shetland, they limped in and they tied up next to Eastbjorn with a dismounted engine. So the whole engine was like hopped off its mounts and like crashed down to the engine bay. It was horrible. And they said, yeah, like a big wave dismounted our engine. That's not really true, because we found the nuts of the engine mounts in the bilge, and they'd been there for a long time. A long time. And so what had happened was that this engine, over years probably, they had unscrewed themselves. When the engine was running, it's vibrating, and these nuts had just unscrewed themselves, plop into the bilge. And at that point, the engine was just sitting, balancing on top of the mounts. And then it was only took that wave was just doing the last little, dotting the I's and crossing the T's and throwing the engine off the mounts. And that job would have taken 2 minutes with a spanner if they only had just looked at it. At some point during this months before that race, they just looked at the engine. They could have found that, and just tightened up those nuts. And now they had a huge project on their hands. Luckily, they tied up to the right boat. I'm not sure if they knew what we were up to with all that we like to keep our stuff in order. But we had all the tools that they needed to get that project fixed, and it was really satisfying. Like, we had everything, we knew exactly where it was, and it was great. And they were actually able to fix it before the leg back to Bergen. So that's another good point. Keep your tools in order. Have everything you need on the boat. You should have all the tools you need to basically disassemble your entire boat and put it back together, especially if you go long distance cruising, because you're gonna have to do a lot of stuff yourselves.
I gotta say, I gotta just give a little aside here about tools. We had a rule, Adam and I made a rule when we were outfitting Falcon. That's Adam, he's our maintenance guy. He's in charge of the maintenance on both boats, so August and I don't have to forget that we forget. We can just blame him when he forgets. But the tools is like, if you need a tool once, okay, maybe borrow it. If you need it twice, buy it. And if you have to buy it, buy the best version of whatever you're gonna buy, and don't let it rust in the bilge. Because that's like the worst. The boat's got like full outfitted tools and they're all rusty and nothing works.
That's right, you gotta maintain your tools as well. So it's like turtles all the way down with maintenance stuff. Great. Next part, documentation. This is also essential. Knowing what you're going to do is important with the planning side of things. Knowing what you have done is also very important. And it's gonna help you so much with your maintenance going forward. You're gonna forget, like, what parts did you get, how much oil did you need, serial numbers, what size tools do you need up at the masthead when you go to check stuff out. So super important to write down all these things. Your future selves are gonna be very happy that you did that. Also, any future buyer that you might want to sell your boat to one day is gonna be very happy you did that. It's a massive green flag. If you go to look at a boat and the person can have like all the documentation of all the maintenance they've ever done, is really great. It's also like keeping, just like in this whole monitoring thing, just keeping track of how the systems on your boat progress and age over time. Super important. And we do this on all the boats, especially with our rigging inspections on before and after every trip on our boats. We go aloft, and on Eastbourne I have a dedicated camera that I use for nothing else. Go up the rig, snap pictures of everything, and then we have a really great archive of pictures of the whole rig, kind of documenting how it changes over the years. And it's so great to know, because if you see a little chafe mark up the rig, or a little bit of corrosion or something, you're not sure, oh, did this happen just now? Is there something new here that we might need to address? Or was this maybe just a badly run halyard like 10 years ago who I just missed? You go into the archive, you see it right away. And if it's like corrosion, you can track, see how that develops over time. Very, very useful. You, Andy, you scared me into going to the doctor a couple of years ago to check up on my moles. And I went to the doctor, and I have a lot of moles, and I asked the doctor, like, hey, do these things look dangerous at all? And he asked, like, what did they look like 6 months ago? He couldn't tell me if those were dangerous. Just looking at them, he needed to see how they progressed over time. And it's exactly the same with boats. Of course, I didn't know what they looked 6 months ago, and they ended up like cutting away all of them. I like lost weight that day. It was horrible. Turns out I take better care of my boat than my own body. It's just not great. But yeah, super useful. So yeah.
If we can talk about just a quick example of how we do this documenting, it's a little, because our boats get used a lot and by a lot of different people. But on board, we have a handwritten maintenance logbook that Adam has developed, and we print our own logbooks for the boats and for the maintenance, because that nothing exists that has it in the format that we like. But we do everything by hand. We write it down. At the end of the trip, that gets then transferred to the computer, and then it gets sent to Adam, and Adam then puts it in the database that we have that tracks everything. So he's got like the master copy of digitally all this maintenance stuff. And then on the boat, we have these logbooks that's like, okay, did you observe something? Did you fix it? Or does it like need to be fixed? And we have a little log. Those are the 3 categories that it falls under. And then as a new skipper comes on the boat, or if you come back the next time, you can just go through that logbook, because that has literally every little thing in it, from I changed the filter on the water maker to I changed the split pin in the headstay. And you can just go back through and see what has happened on that boat in that logbook. And then you contact Adam and be like, okay, hey, what of this stuff has been fixed? What hasn't been fixed? What I need to be aware of? And like you said, all the pictures of not just the rig, but all this stuff. So that's a nice way to organize this, is by hand on the boat, digitize it when you get a chance to connect to something, and then you can organize it on the computer that way.
Great, yeah. There's one other way to win at this maintenance stuff, and that is to make sure that you don't get over encumbered by, fancy, complicated, high maintenance gear, like you mentioned, Andy. Again, Motessier, the way he did it, he didn't bother maintaining his engine; he just threw it overboard, and that's also an option. So, all right, that's it. I think we're on to weather.
Yes, my favorite subject. Thank you, Skipper. All right, so again, weather is my favorite thing to talk about. And if we're talking about seamanship as anticipation, being able to anticipate the weather is the biggest advantage you can give yourself in an offshore passage. This little clip is when we did not anticipate the weather. This was going across the Atlantic. We had you get squalls in the tropics. This was a particularly heavy one. It's impossible to show wind speed and waves in a video. It's blowing 50 knots in this video. And it is extremely gnarly. We only had one reef in the mainsail because it was like flat calm before this. All of a sudden, there's this big black cloud on the horizon. It's like, that looks a little sketchy. Let's roll that jib in. And this is what we had. It only lasted for, 20 minutes. But that's what it felt like afterwards. Poor job by me of anticipating that weather. We should have known better. This was back in 2019. I've learned a lot since then. But weather is one of these things that's probably also the most technical thing that you'll need to learn. And most people start from a very basic knowledge of weather, and you end up relying a lot on forecasters and things like that, which don't always hold true. Quickly, the difference between weather routing and weather forecasting. Weather routing is where someone ashore is giving you advice on where you should go based on the weather. Weather forecasting is simply information. In your early days of ocean sailing, I think it's really good to work with a weather router so that you can learn about this stuff as you go. And eventually, once you get comfortable with it, you're not going to probably need the routing. You can just use information, make your own decisions. Somebody asked me the other day if we still use WRI. WRI stands for Weather Routing Inc. They've been working with us since the mid-2000s when Mia and I worked at the rallies. They do the forecasting for the World Cruising Club, for all the ARC rally, stuff like that. And they do forecasting for us. Nowadays, we use them more as a teaching tool because we tend to do our own forecasting information because myself and a lot of our other skippers, we really like this weather stuff. We've gotten pretty good at it. But we use them as like a backstop. So if I'm getting ready to do a trip, Falcon just arrived in Lagos, Portugal the other day from England. That's a very difficult passage this time of year, especially getting across the Bay of Biscay. So the Bay of Biscay is kind of like Europe's version of the Gulf Stream here. So right now people are getting ready to head south. You got to get out the bay, across the Gulf Stream, and down to the Caribbean. There's a couple different challenges on that route. So we always use WRI to say, like, okay, this is what we're seeing. What are you guys seeing? Please send us a forecast. And if what I see and what they see looks different, then I'll pick up the phone and be like, hey, you guys are the experts here. I'm clearly not looking at something right here. Let's discuss this. But there are sources of weather that you can learn on your own, and this is a great area where you guys can study at home because this is a GRIB file. It's called Gridded Information in Binary. A GRIB file, you hear this bounced around, weather models. All that stands for, GRIB, is it's a file format. It's like a PDF. You need a PDF viewer to look at the information contained in a PDF document. You need a GRIB viewer to look at the information contained in a GRIB file. All weather forecasts are, at their core, a prediction of the future. What do we know about society as a whole predicting the future? We're not very good at it. So when it comes to weather forecasts, what's more interesting to me than the actual forecast is how certain am I about any given forecast? And we can deduce that certainty through a number of ways. And this comes into what I talk about again, anticipating. Just as a wide example, if I have a forecast, and I'll talk about how I know if it's certain or not, but if I have a forecast that I'm really confident in, then I might make more aggressive decisions in my routing or sail plan when we're actually heading out. If I am less certain in that weather forecast, I'm going to want to make more conservative decisions because the certainty, it might not actually, what I think is going to happen might not actually happen. So I used to get really frustrated with WRI. They'll send a text forecast, and it'll be like, first this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen, then this will happen. It's like, guys, you need to rewrite this. Like, what you're actually saying is, first, we think this is going to happen, and then we're pretty sure this is going to happen, but it might not happen, and then this might happen later on. So trying to, like, think about this in terms of uncertainty instead of just a yes, this, then this, then this. So I actually have a lot of sympathy for weather forecasters because they take a lot of shit, but they're trying to predict the future. Like, this is impossible. So back to GRIB files. This particular program is called LuckGrib. It's what we use. A lot of sailors use Predict Wind. Everybody seems to love Predict Wind. They do a really, really good job of marketing. They're everywhere. They're all basically showing you the same information. There's various models. Predict Wind does have some of their own proprietary models. I personally don't like Predict Wind's interface. I prefer this interface, but that's kind of just because I'm used to it. But the bottom line is, if I take the GRIB file that's embedded in this information, and I look at that on Predict Wind or LuckGrib or any other GRIB viewer, the display may look differently because they're taking that underlying information and displaying it with colors and shapes and all the rest. But the underlying information is exactly the same if you're looking at the same model. So when we talk about GRIBs, there's two widely available models. You have the GFS, which is made by NOAA here in the US, and then you have the ECMWF, which is AKA the Euro model. There's lots of talk. It's like, oh yeah, the Euro model is way better than GFS. we don't care about what is better or worse than others. And they both do things better and worse than each other, depending on what they're trying to forecast. The GFS stands for Global Forecasting System, maybe. But the point is, both of these models are global models. And when I say model, it's literally a math equation. They put data in, and a prediction comes out. And this is forecasting the entire world. So it doesn't take into account some of like the local anomalies here on the Chesapeake or up in Canada, for example. There's local models that do that, but like they can't possibly fit all the information into this to get an exact, accurate representation of what we're looking at. So when we go ocean sailing, we really care about what is the mechanism that's creating the weather for us. This model was downloaded, I think, 2 days ago. That's Hurricane Milton right there before it went across Florida the other day. And those are two. This is another hurricane that's forming the Atlantic. This was an old tropical storm that went off. But basically, we want to know, okay, if I have a southwesterly wind, if I'm sailing from the Chesapeake to the Caribbean and I've got a southwesterly wind, what is the big picture weather system that is creating that wind? Why is it doing that? So we can go into a lot of detail on that, but I don't have time for that right now. But the point is, learn what the weather you have, where is it coming from? And then how do these systems evolve? How is the weather changing? So just as important as certainty, you want to look at the trend. So like if I'm sitting in Annapolis waiting for a weather window to go offshore to the Caribbean, I want to look at the trend. Is the weather trending? Because every day you're going to download a new model, and every day it's going to look different because it's different. You know, it's constantly changing. But I want to look, is that change, is it changing in my favor, or is it changing against me? Is the weather forecast shaping up to look better and better or worse and worse? And then taking into account, okay, how certain am I about that? And that's how you can make these kind of decisions. Incidentally, like, what's the most important weather feature when you're planning a departure? You have two aspects of weather. You have departure, and then you have what you're going to deal with at sea. If we use that example of Chesapeake to the Caribbean, you have the Gulf Stream out here to contend with, which goes in this direction. It starts out here off Hatteras. So your goal, and you can get to the Gulf Stream from the mouth of the Chesapeake in about 2 days. You can get across the Gulf Stream in like 48 hours. You can have there's a very, very high degree of certainty in weather models in the sort of 0 to 3 day range. These models are so good now that for 3 days, you can get a really good idea of what's happening. And that 3 days is enough to get you out across the Gulf Stream. But it's not enough to get you all the way to Tortola. That's like a 12-day passage on a 40-foot boat. So you're looking at this in stages. It's like, all right, give me a 3-day forecast to get across the Gulf Stream. Now, this is also kind of counterintuitive. Gulf Stream flows to the northeast. You know that wind against current is dangerous, so you don't want to go out there in a northeasterly, especially if it's blowing more than 30 knots. So you'd think, okay, wind with current, southwesterly wind, it's going with the current, that's the forecast I'm looking for. Well, that would be wrong, because most of the time, a southwesterly wind, this time of year, in this part of the world, indicates a coming cold front. And a cold front is attached to a low pressure system. So this is just a big low pressure system. They spin counterclockwise in the northern hemisphere. As that cold front approaches, that southwesterly wind increases. As the front goes through, you get this wild wind shift to the northwest, sometimes rain, thunderstorms, really unsettled weather. And if you would leave to cross the Gulf Stream in a southwesterly, you're going to sail right into that. And there was an example of the Salty Dog Rally. This was in the very early days of the Salty Dog Rally back in like 2012 or 13. They did exactly that, and like 5 boats had to get rescued because they weren't ready for those kind of conditions. That's a whole other story because those boats shouldn't have been out there in the first place. But they set themselves up for failure by sailing into bad weather. So we're in a pattern right now here in Annapolis. We've had such beautiful weather because we had a cold frontal passage earlier this week. So when you're doing this trip, when you get a cold front that goes through, the wind shifts to the northwest. It indicates a coming high pressure. High pressure is associated with fair weather. The wind goes to the north, and then as that high moves across, the wind goes from west to northwest to north, all the way around to northeast. So you basically have a window to leave right after a cold front, get on that northerly wind. Now you're sailing out of the bay on a downwind, going fast, get across the Gulf Stream before the wind goes all the way around. And now once you're across the Gulf Stream and in deep water, now you kind of take what you get. The next challenge is, did you leave late enough in the year so there's no more tropical storms out there? And that's getting later and later and later as we contend with the differences in climate change and stuff. But anyway, you can't predict that because it's a 12-day passage. So that's just a very, very quick look at like, okay, if you're planning a passage, what are you going to look at? Another source of weather, and by the way, to figure out that certainty, you can look at two different ways to deduce certainty. One is you look at a single model downloaded today, tomorrow, and the next day. As you download that model and refresh it, how much has it changed? If it hasn't changed from one day to the next that much, that indicates a higher level of certainty. If it changes dramatically, then you have a higher level of uncertainty. You want to make more conservative decisions. The other way to do it is you look at two different models, download the GFS and the Euro on the same day at the same time, and go out sort of 0 to 3 days, 3 to 5 days, 5 to 7 days, and eventually those models will diverge. The question is, how quickly do they diverge? Do they diverge after 1 to 3 days? Okay, that's high uncertainty. If they don't diverge until 5 days, that's high degree of certainty. And there are some, LuckGrib actually has a function in here where you can download two models at the same time, and it'll actually graph that. It'll tell you that divergence between two models if you pull up the right setting. So that's two ways to look at it. And then there's also a great way to overwhelm yourself by looking at all the models. It's not worth it. GFS, the Euro model, they're both readily available. They're very, very good. We're not good enough meteorologists to even evaluate anything else. So focus on those two and look at those differences between them to figure out, to get a sense of certainty and uncertainty. Another thing that is really important is a model is a mathematical formula. It's numbers in, numbers out. It's done by a computer. It's not analyzed by a meteorologist. As I said, people say, oh, the Euro model's better, GFS is better, whatever. Well, to get an actual forecast by a meteorologist, which is what this is, they're going to look at a bunch of different models. They're going to know from their training what one does good, one does bad, one does whatever. And then they're going to draw their own forecast based on all that information. So this is a website called the Ocean Prediction Center. It's done by NOAA. This is for the Atlantic. They have the same thing for the Pacific. And interestingly enough, this is called the synoptic chart. This is like the conditions at the time this was downloaded. So this was issued on the 8th of October. And it tells you the forecaster's name right here. But they will make predictions in this style for only 4 days out. Gribs will go, the GFS, I think, you can run for 16 days. Well, that's, just hocus pocus. If the weather forecasters for the ocean are only going 4 days out, that's kind of all you need to know about how certain we can take our weather forecasts in the models. Just because the LuckGrib or Predict Wind will tell you what it's going to do in 7 to 10 days, the forecasters don't even attempt to do that because they know better. So these models go out, or not models, these forecasts go out 4 days in advance. You can see the current conditions, plus 24 hours, plus 48 hours, so on and so forth. And this Ocean Prediction Center is a great resource. They have ice charts. When I sailed up to Greenland last year, they've got ice charts, all kinds of stuff up there. Great resource for studying. Also, LuckGrib, even if you don't use the software, that website, this program's designed by like one guy, I think in New Zealand, and he has a great resource on his website that talks about how models work, how the forecasting and stuff works, how the routing works. It's really, really interesting. So take that home, luckgrib.com, and study that site. And even if you don't use the software, it's a great way to learn about how models work and how you can use them to your advantage. Last thing I'll say about this, when we do our nav briefings on the boats, you don't need to layer in weather in your decision making until you actually figure out what the route is. So we'll always make a route navigation-wise from A to B. And then when you put the weather on top of that route, so if we go back to not to that one, back to this route. So like you're going to go from Hatteras sort of to Tortola. Well, that rum line route is going to look like that. But once you lay on top of it the weather and the weather patterns, you're not going to actually sail that route on this particular course because the further south you get into the trade winds, now you have easterlies. And the most important thing with cruising offshore is wind angles. Even more important than wind speed. If I've got 40 knots behind me, I'm much happier sailing in the right direction with small sails, going fast, than I am if I have 25 knots on the nose. Tacking upwind and 25 knots in the ocean sucks. So I would rather have 40 knots behind me than 25 knots upwind. So it's all about wind angles. So my point with this, use your navigation, find A, find B, draw the line, then layer on top of it the weather information, and that's going to let you decide, all right, am I going to stay on the rum line? Am I going to go left? Am I going to go right? Where gives me the best opportunity to have good sailing angles? Because in cruising, you're not optimizing for speed. That's racing. You're optimizing for comfort. You want to still make fast passages, but not at the expense of beating upwind for 5 days. Like, take the long way and sail on, anything tighter than a 60-degree apparent wind angle is really not fun. So try to optimize for that. Try to go out of your way to make that, or wait for a different weather window. It's why I said, it's much better to leave Annapolis on a north wind and sail across the Gulf Stream in a straight line than try to beat out of it. Same thing is true, like when we're looking for a departure window, we always want to try to find a departure window where the wind is on the beam or after the beam, because it minimizes the risk of people getting seasick. Upwind, you're much more likely to get seasick. Downwind, I'd rather leave port on a long trip in no wind and just accept that I'm going to motor for the first 24 hours than beat in 20 knots of wind right off the bat. Mia can tell you, I'll ask this question in the panel. She had the women's trip from Bergen to Amsterdam earlier this summer. 7 out of 8 of the crew were puking the first night because they were sailing upwind in 30 knots. But they didn't have a choice. And lastly here, I put a text forecast. This is what it looks like from WRI. This is an example of, this is the forecast they sent WRI from the Plymouth to Lagos trip that they just completed. Reading a text forecast is a skill. Interpreting not just geography, like they're talking about here. Okay, a cold front will extend from west of Ireland southwest towards approximately 42 north, 15 west. Well, after a while, you'll be able to picture in your head where is 42 north, 15 west on a chart. But it's really helpful to take these text forecasts and look at them next to a grid, because a grid file doesn't give you any information other than what you see visually. So take a text forecast and use a grid file, and you'll find that they're describing the features that you're seeing on a grid or on a synoptic chart like this. So this is kind of why I said we use WRI as a teaching tool, because we'll sit down around the table, I'll go through the grids, we'll go through the synoptic charts, and then I'll have somebody in the crew read out each paragraph, and we'll interpret, we'll sort of translate, okay, what did you just read? What is that actually saying, and what does it look like on the weather chart? Because once you're at sea, unless you have Starlink, your weather information becomes very, very low resolution. You're only getting a small area. I could never download that grid from Iridium Go. I could get a square that's maybe this big that goes for 3 days. So you always get as much high resolution stuff as you can before you go, and then unless you've got Starlink, which I guess most people have now, you're limited in resolution offshore. So this is like a very easy thing. I can send August a text message with this information to his Iridium Go, and he can, okay, I've got good weather forecast information. So there's with resources for that. Again, I love this stuff. I want to do like a whole weekend on just weather, because I think there's a lot we can learn, and it's super fun. But that's all I have time for today. Quick takeaways before we wrap this up. Number 1, study. Read books. Read everything you possibly can. It's really fun if you read the right books, and read the right books in the right way, and you will learn a lot. Probably my number 1 recommendation on that sort of example is Kretschmer's Sailing a Serious Ocean. That, I think, is the best example of a really interesting narrative, but like peppered with useful information if you read it with the right frame of mind. Now, he tends to get himself in a lot of hurricanes, so maybe it's a do as I say, not as I do type of thing, but the books are great. Number 2, practice. Practice all the things that you can, as much as you can, before you actually do this for the first time. And quick plug, that's what we do. You can come and practice with us and with Brady and Blue. We're literally there so that you guys can practice in a safe environment and not have to break your own boats. You can break our boats instead. And then just a reminder, like when we talk about seamanship, we're talking about learning how to anticipate. When you don't anticipate, when the weather forecast doesn't do what you said it was going to do, learn how to adapt. That's the point to that. Eventually, you're going to have to, you can't predict everything. You're going to have problems, and that's where adapting comes into play. All right. I'm going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to get Brady and Blue up here, and then we'll move on to the next session. Thank you, guys.
have a maintenance man. That is crazy. I can't imagine what it's like just to have somebody fly in and fix all this stuff. We'll get there. I head out to Mexico in about a week, and it begins for me. So I was like, oh. Cool. Thank you for that, Andy. That was awesome. Like Andy said, cruising distilled. We're trying to distill this stuff down, so it's a lot to cover in an hour. But let's go ahead and get started. So, cruising essentials, as Andy covered a little bit more of the offshore stuff and open ocean sailing and what goes along with that, we're going to try and do our best to tell you what is important in our world as far as cruising, liveaboard cruising, coastal cruising, being near land more than we're offshore. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm Brady, this is Blue. Our background, we have about 15 years combined sailing, ocean sailing, full-time liveaboard cruising without a home base, which we'll talk about later how important that is. But we've covered about 120,000 nautical miles in those years, going around the world, but also going north and south a lot. Because at the equator, what's the globe? At 24,000, something like that. So we went north and south a lot. We founded Cruisers Academy after all that time of living aboard to teach people how to live on sailboats and how to cross oceans and do it properly. So today's talk is split up into 3 different kind of layers or sections. The first layer is going to be philosophy of cruising, so a little bit more mindset driven, which is really, really important. Then we're going to go into some best practices of off-grid long-term sailboat living, and then some nitty-gritty details of gear and recommendations after that. We're not going to talk about weather today because Andy went into weather, but just again, at the top of the list of what is most important and what really matters is weather, right? Like, learn weather. Look at forecasting. There's a book that we recommend called, what's it called? My mind just went blank. I was thinking about it over there.
Now you're putting me on the spot. There we go.
There it
Man
is.
versus
She has it
weather.
right there. Man versus weather.
That's one of our alumni. Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of our alumni. Thank you. Wow. She actually bought it. Yeah, so do you want to come up and give a book review? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so it's written by Dennis DeClaudio, I think is his name, and he's a comedian, but he's also a scientist and a meteorologist. So he talks about weather as if he's trying to battle it, and he always loses, of course, because weather always wins. So yes, weather's very important, but we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of that. More resources for you guys after this show. Of course, Andy and me at 59 North have a lot. We have a lot on our website as well, cruisersacademy.com/resources. We have blogs on there on how to build your own marine med kit, ditch kits, how to get your captain's license if you're looking to go the U.S. Coast Guard route, how to crew on boats, what questions to ask if you're going to crew on boats, and a lot more, and we're constantly adding to that. So use the resources you have. So who in here has seen sailing on YouTube? Quite a few. Actually, not as many hands went up. That's nice. Cool. Well, you probably expect something like that picture on the side there, right? The crystal clear water, some kind of mermaid jumping off the back of a boat, beautiful sunny skies. You can forget all about it because it turns out you work a lot. It's a lot of hard work. Don't forget it all. YouTube is great, of course. You can learn a lot, and it's very entertaining. But it is a ton of work, and the reality is you're going to spend a lot of your time working on boats. The saying is, boat work in exotic places is cruising, and it's pretty true, unless you have your maintenance guy flying. So the first thing we're going to get into is mindset. Really, really important. The most important thing. It'll change your experience no matter where you are. This quote here, I don't know where I'm going, but I know exactly how to get there. It sums it up really, really well for me. It kind of describes a lot of the time when you're cruising and you leave a destination and you're going over the horizon, you know you're going west, but you don't know exactly where you're going to end up sometimes. Like, it's a reality when you're cruising. You might get blown to a different island. Having the mindset to know how to get somewhere, know how to problem solve, know what to expect is huge. That'll change everything about your experience. So the 2 common mindset hangups that we see, the first one is unrealistic expectations. Being in the industry that we're in, we get a lot of people that send us messages or call us and say, I can't wait to buy the boat and just sail away from everything, sail away from all of my problems, right? That's what you guys did. You're like, yep. A lot of nods and smiles over there. The reality is that's just not true, unfortunately. You're going to trade in one set of problems for another set of problems. And those problems that you might have on land are going to be put in a pressure cooker. That's what a boat is. It's a pressure cooker, so if things are good, they're real good. If they're bad, they're real bad. So it's going to get worse. And I'm not saying that to scare you. Again, we're just talking about expectations and mindset of you're not going to sail away from your problems. And it's not a bad thing. Problems are good, right? The lows are what bring the highs, and overcoming problems are what make you really enjoy cruising. So setting expectations of being able to handle problems and know they're going to come up sounds trivial and obvious, but really go through that and think about that, of what's going on in your normal day life now. The second most common mindset issue we see are people that stop cruising. Usually they cruise for a while and they stop, is the lack of consistent friendships and community. So if you talk to any YouTuber or anybody that's been sailing around the world for a long time, this is one of the most common reasons why it's very hard. If you look at that picture there on the side, so there's me, my brother, Brian, Blue's in that picture, and then inside is probably Karen. The four of us lived in a 53-foot by 15-foot space for years and years on end. So if you imagine all the people in your life right now, whether it's through work friends or school or neighbors or whatever it is, and you reduce that down to 2 or 3 people that you're with regularly. Some of you are smiling and nodding. You're like, yes, I'd like to leave all those people behind. But that's the reality, right? So you're going to reduce your friendship and your community dramatically when you start cruising. Of course, you're going to build the most amazing friendships too. I have some of the best friends I've ever made in my life. When I was out living on the sailboat and cruising, you have common grounds with so many different things. And just like the pressure cooker example, your friendships are going to grow dramatically as well. But just know that your community is going to shrink a lot. So we have a solution written in here. Oh, did you feel that in, Blue?
Oops.
So, when we were making this presentation, we were trying to think of the solution, and there's not a solution, right? There's definitely not a solution to this kind of issue with the community and friendships that you constantly have to say goodbye to. What we do have here are a few tips. So lean into the cruiser's community. This is a really important one. Everywhere you go when you're sailing and cruising, there's going to be some sort of community there. They're going to be putting on yoga. There's going to be a bonfire at the beach. There's all kinds of stuff constantly going on, and lean into it. Force yourself to get involved in the cruising community. It'll make you feel connected even when you're on the other side of the world. Dinghy over and say hello. This is one of my favorite ones that is really being lost nowadays. People talk on email, especially with Starlink, email or text or an app that shows people nearby, whatever it is. Dinghy over and say hello. Some of the best friends I've ever met have been by dinghying over. You go over, you say hello, grab a beer, and then you end up going to the beach, hanging out, and you'll be surprised how many friends you meet that way. Keep a home base if you can. This one's an interesting topic because in the cruising world, it's almost thought upon to sell everything and sail away, and it's really romanticized. And while that's great, if you can financially do it, of course, and if things work out, keep a home base. I can't tell you how many times I wanted to have a home base when I was out for 10 or 11 years. I wanted to go home to something and take a break, which is the next point, is visit home before too late. So this one, take it really seriously. Burnout does exist for cruising. You're constantly going places, saying goodbye. Things are constantly breaking. It's very challenging. So keep a home base or go home and visit family. Like, I really wish I would have visited my mom a lot more times while I was out there cruising, and I wasn't able to. It gives you a chance to recharge, and then in the long run, when you come back to the boat, you have fresh eyes, and you feel that much more excited about it. So make it some sort of a priority for you. All right, next we're going to talk about going slow.
Alrighty, so this is something that we've been talking about quite a bit at the booth yesterday with people who have started cruising. And they got excited right away, and they were trying to get to the next feat, whatever that is. If it's crossing an ocean, or we've been in Mexico for the last couple seasons, and so everyone's so excited to get to the Pacific because it's super dreamy and it's highly coveted, which is true, but in the meantime, they're passing by a lot of nooks and crannies along the way that are worth visiting. So go slow. Cruising isn't a competition. I can say that the best places we've ever been were completely off the beaten path. They weren't popular, they weren't recommended, they were super random, and they blew our mind. So this is actually a photo of DELOS sitting in front of massive sand dunes in Namibia, which is a country in just north of South Africa, and one of the craziest places we've ever been. So we actually took 3 months to cross the Southern Atlantic, which to racers might sound like an abomination, but it was one of the best experiences of my life. So yeah, this is the normal route that most people cross from South Africa. They head up to the Caribbean. Maybe they make a couple stops along the way. Namibia, there's a couple islands here, or a stop on some islands in Brazil, but usually takes a month or two. We decided to go a different way that took, like I said, 3 months to get across, and then this whole track took us about a year in total. So we went up to Namibia. We got to anchor in front of those beautiful sand dunes and that are full of diamonds, it turns out. Diamonds aren't really that rare. Sorry to bust everyone's bubble on that one. We found a guy living on an island with 10,000 penguins in Africa. He hated penguins, so it was a very bizarre experience. We went up to St. Helena. We went up to Ascension. We got to dive with sharks in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, which was very cool. They were aggressive, also an interesting experience. And then instead of going north, we decided to sail over 2,000 nautical miles south to the dangerous Brazil. So we had been told not to go to Brazil, not a safe place to go. Most people have probably heard that reputation about the country before, but we decided to do our own research and really look into it. And what we found was that there was a couple places that boardings had been happening. So I remember we had our map on DELOS, and we drew a little skull and crossbones on a couple anchorages in Brazil, and we decided not to go there. And we had the most amazing time. We spent 6 months in Brazil, maxed out our visas down to the very, very last day, and we sailed 4,000 nautical miles of the coastline. And Brazilians are the best people I've ever met in my life. We were totally safe the whole time. There was a couple boats that went to the anchorage that we had the skull and crossbones on. They got boarded. So do your own research, but don't be turned away by other people's opinions. And then we went up a river in French Guiana and Suriname. So French Guiana is a totally developed country. Suriname, they're like living in huts, hunter-gatherer style on the other side of the river. Not many people go there, so a very cool experience. And then we landed in the Caribbean just in time for an unplanned carnival. So really cool experience, all in all a year instead of a month or two. So all of that to say is just measure your journey in your own terms. Choose your own course. Don't automatically opt in for what other people are doing. Sailors measure their experience in nautical miles. We all stood up here and did that right away. We told you how many nautical miles we have, and that's great. But if you're not working in the yachting industry, that number doesn't really mean anything. So think about ways that you can measure your experience that are meaningful to you. So ways that I like to think about this are, how many mornings did you wake up and jump in the ocean? How many times did you catch your own dinner? Or this is my favorite, how many days in a row did you stay offline in a tiny anchorage where no one knew you were there? I think it's really common now for people to measure their experience in views or likes or posts or something like that, and just challenge yourself to not do that. Just stay offline and enjoy it and be present.
Yes, okay, my turn again. Yeah, which brings us to our next point of becoming a citizen of the world. Remember, you're traveling by an ancient means, right? People have been sailing the world for thousands of years, and we're doing it the exact same way, and we're seeing a lot of the same things. So really lean into that and become a citizen of the world. The first one is be respectful to the locals and their land. Again, you're probably thinking, of course, that's obvious, but a lot of the times what logic we have here in America or in other countries just does not apply. I give a couple examples there. When we first pulled into the Marquesas, it took us 20-something days to cross from Mexico to the Marquesas Islands, crossing the Pacific. There's, back then maybe there was 20 boats doing it, now maybe over 100. And when you get to the Marquesas, what do people have? A lot of trash, right? They have bags of trash. The first cruiser that I saw, he got in his dinghy, loaded his dinghy full of the trash. He zoomed to shore, and started unloading the trash onto the concrete wharf there in the little town. And the locals there that were fishing started yelling at him in French, flipping him off, and basically told him to get out of here and go back to his boat. A little bit later, I saw another cruiser go in, no trash in his dinghy. He had a 6-pack of beer, sat on the wharf with them, talked, fished, hung out, relaxed, and at the end asked, hey, is there a good place for me to dump my trash here? The locals went out of their way to help him load the trash into the dinghy. They pulled a truck up, put the trash in the back of the truck, and took it to the dump for him. So that was the early on, example of you're in their land, you're in their culture, so make sure that you take the time to slow down and talk to people. Be nice. This is really important too. Smile and be patient with officials. It's so many times bureaucracy takes over, or they're slow, whatever it is. It's not very efficient. We can kind of relate to that to, the DMV in the US is kind of that same way. But we were just in Mexico, and I saw this firsthand. We were checking in, and the person that was in front of me was in a rush and being really rude, talking really fast in English to them. And the lady's like, okay, go sit down. You're going to go to the next window. In the meantime, I went outside and bought a pastry from a guy on the road, walked up and said, hola, and handed her a pastry and smiled. And my check-in was done in 10 minutes. Done, complete. We're out the door, and the guy was still sitting there. So it goes a long way to smile and be nice. Learn the language. Learn a couple of words. If you're going, learn how to say hello, how to say how are you, and thank you. And try. And then they'll realize how bad you are, and they'll speak back to you in English usually. So learn the language, really important. Push yourself not just to seek out comforts. These days, it's really easy to hop in an Uber in any country and go to a Costco or something similar. It's easy, and it's a convenient way, and it may seem familiar to you, but take the local taxi, walk, go to the local market, do everything as if you're local, and slow down. Really become a citizen of the world. So mindset is everything. We covered a couple of slides here based on what it is that's really important. Some of you maybe came to this looking for a top 10 list of what gear you should take cruising. And the fact is, the shit that really matters is your mindset. Once you have the right mindset and the right attitude towards cruising and changing into this lifestyle, the rest will fall into place. You'll find the right people at the right time, and everything will fall into place. So mindset is everything. We're going to transition into the next kind of layer of our presentation now and talk about our best practices while aboard cruising.
Okay, who has ever spent time with someone on a sailboat and gotten annoyed with them? Okay.
That's more people than watch YouTube.
All right, so as Brady said, a boat is a pressure cooker, right? Things can be really good when they're good, and then when they're not good, it can go bad very quickly, especially if you're living on board long term. So for any of you that are actually planning on going cruising and living aboard, this is crucial to you having a good experience. It applies to if you're crossing an ocean or if you're just day sailing on a lake, it's going to make a big difference. So things that we found that have worked really well, communicating expectations ahead of time. So if you're new crew that's joining a boat, we really recommend talking about all of this before you actually go get on the boat, right? So on that website that Brady mentioned, cruiseacademy.com/resources, we actually have a blog on there that lists the questions that we recommend our students to ask before they get on a boat, right? So how are you gonna deal with money? What are the responsibilities? Is everyone gonna share sailing responsibilities? Are they expecting you to show up and cook and clean while everyone else sails? There's a million different ways that your time aboard someone else's boat can go really good or really bad. So talk about those things ahead of time. Who here is going to be sailing with their partner, their significant other? Okay, yeah, maybe half of you. So this will save your relationship. We know a lot of people that have been married for a long time and they go sailing and they say they've never been closer to a divorce than when they had to anchor together in rough conditions in a crowded anchorage for the first time. So talk about expectations constantly. So before me and Brady go to our boat, we learned the hard way that it's always good to share about our expectations for our time period, whether it's a week or a passage or whatever it is. usually they're not the same. So it's nice to get that out in the open ahead of time. We can get on the same page, and then it's way smoother sailing for the entire time. So check in with expectations often with your crew. We believe there's more to being a good captain than just being a good sailor. So I think this is becoming more popular in the sailing world. It's not as old school of a thought, but we think that it's the captain's responsibility to check in on crew morale. So we've had experiences where we've had crew on board, and they weren't exactly honest with us about where they were at with like physical pain or something emotional, and you can get yourself into a really dangerous situation if you're setting across an ocean with someone like that. So sometimes you have to poke and prod a little bit to get people to be honest, but it's really important. Train your crew. Again, this is the captain's responsibility to make sure their crew is trained. Even if someone's just come in to sail with you for the weekend, it only takes 10 minutes to teach them how to handle a wench safely with a loaded line. And I've seen people spend time on a sailboat and it's day 2 and suddenly their hands are completely blistered and gone because they injured themselves. So take the time to train your crew. A common theme that we see with all the people that we teach is that people get a little stuck in their crew roles. So it's easy to stay in your comfort zone, stay in your lane. But if you're sailing as a couple, it's really important that you push each other to be able to handle the boat in all conditions, to be able to get the sails up and down in rough weather, and to be able to know the safety procedures, anchor the boat, dock the boat, okay? It's scary doing that stuff sometimes, but you guys have to make each other do it, okay? Yeah, we've had a lot of people come take our class. A lot of women come take our class and they've lived on boats for years, or their significant others have owned a boat for years and they still don't understand the basic fundamentals of sailing. So that's, again, group responsibility. Push each other to really get there. I think there's a Larry Party quote that says, the best gear you can have on board is a well-trained crew. So people put a lot of time and investment and money into getting good gear, but really take that money and invest in your crew. If that means sending them to a sailing course, again, we're here to help, or whatever's locally available to you. But super, super important to make sure in case of an emergency that this is all set. I think there's a saying that goes something like, don't ever try to learn something from someone you've seen naked before. So if you feel like that applies to you, maybe just have someone else teach your significant other. So yeah, just ask yourself, is open communication an expectation on my boat? And ask yourself that often. So when you're sharing a small space with a lot of people, it's really nice to have boat rules that are just set and that you don't have to be constantly talking about, but you can kind of just rely on. So I'm gonna give an example of how we run our boats. You can take them or leave them, make your own, but these are just some examples. So the first one is that we've always used a cooking rotation. So if we have like 5 crew on board, everyone has a cooking day. If it's your day, you cook lunch, you cook dinner, and if you cook, you clean. The captain does it, and the newest crew member does it all the way through, and it works really well for us. The reason that we like this is it gets everyone involved, and also, if you have 5 crew, 4 days a week, you just get to sit there, someone hands you a bowl of food, and they take it away, and you don't have to worry about it. And then when it's your cooking day, you get to put your effort into cooking, and I think we all agree that having good food is good for crew morale. A lot of people come sailing with us and they expect to be eating like oatmeal and ham sandwiches all week. And I think they're surprised that we actually put a lot of effort into our food. So it's a nice thing to do, especially if you're living on board full time. From sunset to sunrise, we have cockpit rules that we follow. So if we're alone on night watch, we always have a PFD. This will vary a little bit boat to boat. Andy's boats have an exposed cockpit. We have like center protected cockpits, so we're probably a little bit more lenient than they are. But we never leave the cockpit after sunset unless we have on a PFD, we're strapped in, and we've woken someone else up to know that we're going on deck. We follow these rules 100% of the time, whether it's blowing 40 knots or it's dead calm and we're motoring in 0 knots of wind. And we've never had any man overboard issues. So be sure to make these rules and follow them no matter what. This one might surprise people, but we don't drink underway. Alcohol leaves room for error, so we don't mess with that. This one is a new one that I've kind of been starting on our boats. Brady's really battling me on it, quiet time on deck till 8 a.m., which I find very ironic because he doesn't wake up before 8 a.m., so I don't know why he doesn't like this one. But it's just the perfect example of, one of my favorite parts about cruising is to wake up before sunrise, make a coffee, go out on deck, and just be quiet. And we always have new crew and new people on our boats, and I see this as one of their highlights of the trip too. So I see our alumni nodding over there. They get to have that experience too. And it's just a nice way to, even though you're sharing a really small physical space with people, you actually can have personal space within that with having boundaries set ahead of time. Another example of that is the headphone rule. So, I have 6 or 7 people living on a boat for years at a time. And our rule is that if you have headphones in, it means I don't want to talk and I don't really want to be talked to right now. So that's a nice one to build in. I think half the time Brady's not even listening to anything, but it's just his signal, which is totally fair. Like, you have to have alone time on the boat as well. And then speak up. This is our #1 rule on all of our boats all the time. If you don't feel good, if you're sick, always say something. If you see something that doesn't look right, always say something. If you're not sure about the weather, always say something. We have a friend who had quite a bit of sailing experience, and she got on a boat in Australia with her friend, and they didn't talk about expectations. They didn't talk about safety equipment. They didn't do a safety briefing, all the things we've been talking about. And they were going on passage the next day, and her friend spoke up and said, "We're not so sure about this weather. It doesn't look great to us." And because the communication wasn't set as an expectation, the captain decided to not listen. They went on the passage. The captain made some bad decisions, and she woke up in her cabin to water rushing in. Went out on deck. The winches were ripped out of the cockpit, and there was 30-foot breaking waves, and the captain and his daughter were in the water. It was in that moment that they realized they didn't have a life raft. They didn't know where the EPIRB was. They didn't know if it was working, and they had no safety procedures. So you can see how a situation like that could have been avoided so many steps along the way just by having better communication. So luckily, they all made it, but don't end up in that position. Okay, so like Andy said, there's plenty of ways to stay connected. We actually think in our modern day, it's way easier to connect than to disconnect. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about staying disconnected. Andy went into some of his equipment that he uses. We also use the Iridium satellite phone. You can download weather, you can text, you can email, and it's a really good way to get the information that you need but not be connected to the internet full time. The Garmin InReach Mini is something that I've started using this past year. I really like it, especially if you're crew on someone else's boat and you don't want to get a whole sat phone and a whole plan. The Garmin InReach Mini is really small, and you can give your number to like the 1 or 2 people that are your emergency contacts at home, and they can reach you 24/7 without actually being connected to anything else. So that's one I really like. Okay, this could be an unpopular opinion, but I think we share it with 59 North. Starlink can rob you of your experience if you let it. It has its pros for sure. We carry Starlink on our boat, And a lot of times it actually lets us stay out longer, which is really nice. If you're in a place that doesn't have service and you work remotely, maybe that's the case for some of you, that working remotely actually lets you go cruising a lot sooner than you would otherwise be able to. So I'm not hating on Starlink, but I think that you do have to be aware with how much you're using it. So don't do yourself the disservice of crossing an ocean online. We watched a lot of our friends sail across the Pacific this year, and they were online every single day. And it kind of breaks our heart a little bit for anyone that's crossed an ocean and knows that that's one of the best parts of crossing an ocean, is not being online and disconnecting, and the beauty that comes from that. So, you're living close to nature, be present, and you're traveling by an ancient means, so give yourself that opportunity to truly experience it. If you are gonna have Starlink on board, which a lot of people probably are, just have some good habits in place. So have an off switch, be able to turn it off. Have a schedule, like you only turn it on, on days that start with T or whatever it is. Turn it on for an hour in the morning or anything like that. But be sure to not just leave it on. And don't use it on passage if you don't need it. Even better, have a physical barrier. So a lot of people like to mount it on their boat these days. We actually try to keep it not permanently mounted. So if we need it, we take it, we put it out, and if we don't, we actually pack it back up in the backpack, and we shove it in the back of the closet so that it's not just a switch to turn it on. We have to really need the internet to turn it on. So that's another way you can do it. Turn off the internet and learn to use a sextant. Might not always need it, but super fun. And again, it just brings you closer to nature, which is kind of the whole point of sailing, in our opinion.
Okay, the third segment of the presentation today, we're going levels. Now we're at Earth level, the physical shit that matters most. Again, this could be a presentation that goes for probably 2 or 3 days. We could probably go back and forth for a long time on the physical things that do matter, but we're just gonna cover some of the most important ones and distill them down here. So the first one is your actual main engine. Your actual main engine, you're on a sailboat, is your rig and your sails, right? These can be daunting sometimes to think about, and they can also be troublesome when they're needed the most. Sails, for example, like Andy said, I love that you said that about the material. Sails are pretty straightforward. If they're the right shape and there's no tears and they're not stretched too much, they're a sail. You'll be able to tell if something is wrong with your sail very, very easily. But when it comes to rigging, it usually happens quick, and it usually occurs because of a last-minute issue. So we see a lot of last-minute rigging issues, and we've experienced a lot ourselves. Most of it is because it's a little bit intimidating. Procrastination is another big one. I can tell the example of when we were in Thailand, we had 7 people aboard DELOS, and we were provisioned. We were ready to go cross the whole Indian Ocean. The day before passage, the weather was perfect. We went up the rig and found a broken strand. So that delayed everything. We had to redo the entire rig on DELOS. 3 weeks of really, really hard work. Everything got pushed back. It was a really bad situation. And that could have been prevented by checking early and often, just like August told us earlier. The next thing, too, is don't just trust a professional rigger. I've seen a lot of things go wrong after a full rig has been completely replaced, and you're like, yeah, it's good. Nope, go up and look yourself. Learn what to look for. Go aloft often. Get comfortable going aloft and learn what to look for. This specifically happened to us, actually. When we first bought LINTIKA, she had her rig completely replaced within the year by a very reputable rigging company in the San Francisco Bay. And the day before the passage, I went up, right? I should have done it way before. The day before I went up, and that rigging actually comes down through the spreaders, and it's held in place with a ball and a cup. And the riggers had put the wrong size cup inside that little holder. So if we would have had any tension or any shock loads, that rig could have pulled through the spreader and been catastrophic for us. So luckily, we were able to get some new size cups, fix it there on the spot. But don't trust the professionals. Always check it yourself. a little bit deeper into rigging here. It's not a science, it's just balancing. So learn rigging. It's a really important concept to understand, and it's not rocket science. Here's a few basic things to cover what it's all about. So every wire has, that should say breaking load. They do have a working load, but we're talking about breaking loads here. You generally want the rig tension to be anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15% of that breaking load. So you can get a device that will tell you that. They're really simple to use. Depending on your rig and your boat, and if you have an adjustable backstay, all that stuff, that's going to change. But just know that that's the ratio that you want, 10 to 15%, somewhere in that range. If that's happening and your mast is fairly straight, you're in a pretty good spot. Like there's no corrosion, there's no rust, there's no cracks, and your mast is straight and the rig is tensioned like that, you're in a pretty good spot. Some boats will have more of an aft rake in their mast, which means it's bent backwards. But generally, this is how we teach rigging. We take boats in and out of Lake Tahoe every year, and every year it's the same thing of teaching mast straight and the rig tension to the right tension and the percentages, and that's a really good place to start from safety. Check early and often. Make sure you look and touch. Feel the rig. Go up and down the rig. Feel it. If there's any rust, make sure to polish it away and look closely. Usually chain plates are a point that failure occurs. There's a crack. Chain plates are often buried somewhere in the fiberglass or somewhere deep that you can't normally get to. So on LINTIKA, those are cut away, and you can physically see the chain plate when we do our inspections. So if you have a boat and you haven't looked at the chain plates, go look at them, find them. Swages, fittings, spreaders, of course, any place that there's going to be wear and tear. Check well before a passage and directly after a passage and after any big wind event or shock loading. So if you're flying a spinnaker and it shock loads, the next time you have a chance, go look at your rig, check everything to see what happened there. That happened to us, and we found a crack in the spreader after a shock load event like that. And then during normal cruising, usually every 2 or 3 months, we go up. Unless you're doing a passage. You do it before the passage and after the passage. But if you're just doing normal cruising, every 3 months, go do a really thorough check. And what are we looking for? Pretty obvious, the broken and cracked swages or anything like that. That's obvious, but what we're really looking for is any rust that's building up or signs that's about to happen. So the tools that are going to help with that, magnifying glass and a pick, are really nice to have, so you can look close and you can pick the rust away, polish the rust away if there's any rust there. Try and rinse with fresh water as much as you can. Get spare turnbuckles on board, and also have a spare shroud that you can adjust. So a lot of days now you can get shrouds made up that are adjustable from Dyneema, which do a great job. Do you guys have Dyneema rigging on board? As spares. So as spares, it's great because you can kind of put it away a lot easier. It coils up easier. If it gets a little salt water on it, it's not going to rust in the bilge. So having spare Dyneema rigging is really, really good to have. The next slide. This is a common misconception that you need to be a master of everything when you're out sailing. You need to be a MacGyver. Here's our top 6 picks, 6 tips. You don't need to be a master of everything. Familiarize yourself with every system and have the ability to problem solve. Just like Andy talked about, we're talking about problem solving and learning how to problem solve. You can't learn everything about everything before you go cruising. People, that's a big question we get, is how do I know if I'm a diesel mechanic or electrical engineer before I go out? And it's not that important to know everything in depth. It's way more important to have a basic understanding of all of your systems and then go through and have the manuals and the ability to problem solve. Don't be afraid to ask for help. This is probably an ego one, right? If you need help, ask for it. The cruisers community is incredible. There's often somebody anchored next to you that might be a diesel mechanic. So ask for help, talk to your neighbors. We've had a lot of stuff fixed that way. If you're paying someone else to do it, use it as a lesson. So just last year on LINTIKA, our freezer, I was cleaning the ice out of the freezer to defrost it, and I stabbed a hole in our freezer plate, and it leaked out all the gas, and I was like, I don't know the first thing about freezers, so I know the systems, but I hired a nice guy to come over and fix it, and I watched and asked questions the whole time. So if you're having people do work on the boat, be there, watch them, and ask questions the whole time. Redundancy. Can't say enough about redundancy. It's super important. The most important things you're going to need are autopilot. So if you can, have 2 autopilots, your main autopilot and then a backup one. It's the best crew member you'll ever have. They never complain, they never go off watch, and they don't need food. So it's a great crew member to have, and always have a redundant one. What's that? They don't. Nice. Speaking of toilets, no. So the next thing too is safety. So we talked a couple times today about different safety devices. We have a Iridium Go on board that you can take with you in the life raft. You will need to have an iPad or a phone to go with you. We have the Garmin InReach Mini, which is another safety device. All of these have the ability with SOS or to text people or call people. So having redundancy in those is important. When it comes to your navigation too, Navionics and these apps have come so far these days, you can go around the world with just an iPad and the internal GPS on the iPad. If you're gonna do that, that's fine, just have redundancy. Everybody that comes on board that has an iPad or iPhone, have them download the charts offline, make sure they're signed in, and make sure that you can look at them. If lightning strike happens or something goes bad, technology fails all the time, and you have 3 or 4 backups, you're gonna be good to go. This is a really important one if you already have a boat, or if you're planning, go through your boat from the bow to the stern and make a list of the spare parts you need. This is gonna depend a lot on where you're going, the availability of spare parts, and also the age of your boat and budget. Budget's huge when it comes to that, right? Make a list though, starting at the front from your windlass all the way back, and get the spares that you need. We carry spare water pumps on board, spare macerators, all kinds of stuff, so when it goes wrong, you just flip it out and you try to fix the other one, or you can have one shipped in. Things like bilge pumps, most places in the world that have some kind of marine industry will have the most common ones, bilge pumps and things like that. So you don't need 10 bilge pumps spare on board. Have a couple and think about what's going to be available where you're going. Mexico, for example, has quite a lot of stuff because it's bordered with the US, where if you go into French Polynesia, you're not going to find really anything. So plan for what trips you have ahead. And the last thing is to invest in good gear. So solar, batteries, water maker. There's still people that want to romanticize it and go sail around the world and paddle to shore without a water maker and collect water in jugs. It's awesome, it's good living that way, but also if you invest in good gear, you're gonna have a lot more time to be free and to be out there. So the solar, batteries, water maker are really, really important to invest in. All right, the next thing, physical things here, don't skimp on your dinghy. This is really common. We have a lot of people that come take a course with us or message us and they've bought a boat, but they're thinking of the dinghy as the afterthought. Your dinghy is your car. So think about if you're driving across the road with an RV, would you want like a 2-wheel drive Honda Accord or a big 4x4 Jeep, right? You want something that you're gonna use. Think about what you're gonna use it for. If it's just you two and you're not very adventurous, then maybe you can get something a little smaller. Definitely have an aluminum hold bottom. See, this is going against what you guys do because you actually just roll yours up and put it away, right? Yeah, so that's perfect for what 59 North does, right?
You didn't like the dinghy when it had a small mark?
Oh, God, that thing was terrible.
This is terrifying.
You're this close to freezing cold water, and I was like, oh, if a polar bear comes up to us, we're done. Yeah, it was the 4 horsepower that made me feel safe. I remember we were trying to chase we were trying to chase down a polar bear walking on the beach, and we had full throttle, and the polar bear is strolling faster than we're going. And like, we'll catch it to get the photo someday. So yeah, dinghy's important. What are your missions where you're going? You want to stay dry. If you're provisioning, you want to be able to keep groceries in the bottom. Make sure they don't get wet. If you're into diving, if you're into kiteboarding, windsurfing, think about a dinghy that can be your rescue boat. Your adventure car is what it's going to be. The one thing that's non-negotiable, like we just talked about, is having an aluminum hold bottom. There's a lot of dinghy companies now that are carbon, but the minute you go up onto a beach or a rock, it puts a hole in it and destroys everything. There's a lot of dinghies at the boat show too. I actually saw one. On DELOS, we sailed around with a big aluminum dinghy called Maggie. And for years, nobody's built one, and now there's a company right by our booth that builds these aluminum ones. So go check those guys out. I think they're doing a great job. And finally, safety. A lot of people overlook this, but your dinghy is essentially a second life raft. So if I'm offshore, our procedure to ditch the boat is, yes, inflate our life raft that's going to hold people, but also get our dinghy in the water too. Drop it off the davits, tie it next to the life raft if time allows. And then you have a life raft with a motor alongside of your regular big orange one. So think of your dinghy as safety as well. Think about, can it tow your boat? If you tie it to the hip, is your outboard strong enough so you can motor if your motor goes out through a pass or into a marina if you need to? I've had to do that quite a few times. Yep, I just kind of talked about this. I went ahead of my slide, sorry. This is the perks of having a good dinghy, and think that through. And finally, anchoring. First thing is be a good neighbor. Learn how to anchor, practice. This is one thing that you can practice constantly and go over and over and over and practice. We usually see the most common issues are 60% skill set and 40% gear issue. So skill set with anchoring, it's not rocket science. Make sure you have the proper scope out, set the anchor back down, make sure it holds, and do it over and over and over again to get a feel for your situation. Take the time to learn the proper skills. God mode, this is something that we teach. It gives you a really good visual of how to see the anchor and what's happening, and tell people when they're dropping the anchor, take yourself into the sky, picture the seabed floor, picture the anchor dropping, picture how much scope is laying in a straight line back to the boat, and everything, your swing radius, everything like that. This day and age, we tend to focus on the instruments in front of us. Somebody's at the bow dropping the anchor, and you're staring at the instruments, and look around, think of you're at the top of the mast looking down on the boat. That helps a lot. Gear, oversize your anchor if you can, and get as much chain as you can. We're not racers, so we're not worried about weight here. Get a big anchor, rebuild whatever you need to do on the bow to get a big solid anchor, and get enough chain. The chain thing is a good tip for people that aren't comfortable with anchoring or starting out, because a lot of times in places you're going in the Caribbean or someplace, it's very tight anchoring, right? And a lot of that is because people want to be in shallow water close to shore because they might not have enough scope to anchor otherwise. So having enough scope, extra scope on your anchor, allows you to anchor back away from people, away from bugs, away from noise, and be in your own little world with your swing radius. So get lots of chain and oversize your anchor. Make sure it's attached. I know that sounds funny, but seriously, this happens. I've had it happen a couple of times, not on our boat specifically, but with people in different anchorages. There was a super yacht that pulled into Tonga, and they came right into the center. They dropped their anchor, and you're watching, and then you hear somebody go, "Oh shit!" and it just goes boop, the last bit of chain. And they were anchoring in like 150 feet of water or something, and lost. I think they tried to get a diver, but that's a huge anchor. What actually happened was at the end of their anchor line, there's something called a bitter end. So the bitter end attaches the anchor to the boat. Nobody tied that on. So if you have a boat and you've never been to the bottom of your anchor locker, make sure it's attached somewhere in case everything fails. Use an anchor alarm. There's a lot of new apps these days for anchor alarms. We use something called Anchor Pro. It attaches to your phone, GPS, and if you're anchored, you do a radius around your phone, and if your phone leaves that area, an alarm goes off. So it's great for sleeping at night. Alarm will go off right next to your head. It's bad if you put your phone in your pocket and go paddleboarding, because then you're paddling away from the boat and then an alarm goes off. But a really good peace of mind, so use the tools that you have. Never leave your boat if you're in doubt of the conditions, and never trust the forecast. And he just talked about, forecasts are 3 to 4 days out, are pretty accurate these days. After that, they start dropping dramatically, 50%, 50 after that. So make sure to set your boat up, even if you're anchoring in calm conditions, anchor as if it's going to blow 40 knots. So a good way to do this, a kind of good way to do this, is to take your boat out in a really windy day, put it in reverse, and drive into the wind in reverse. See how much RPM you need to overcome that wind strength. Then go and anchor and back down at that RPM. It's not an exact science, but if your anchor holds that RPM, you're pretty good that it'll hold at that wind strength. So I know on LINTIKA, if I back down at anchor at 15 or 1600, I can motor upwind in about at reverse 40 knots or so. So at 40 knots, we're good at that point with that kind of scope out. All right, so if you're taking notes or not taking notes, this is this. I gotta tell one angry story. Okay.
This is like all-time hilarious. Well, also scary. So I'll try to make it short. We were in Barbados. I had just sailed Falcon across the Atlantic. Barbados has no natural harbors. It's just like beach. There's like a short, shallow shelf of sand, and then it drops off. So the anchoring is really challenging because there's no harbors, just behind the island. And when the wind's blowing from the east, it's fine. Anyway, there was this family, from Poland. They were on a X-46. We had met them in Cape Verde, so we got to know them. Super nice people. We were anchored right behind them in Barbados. We got in before them. They came in a couple days later. And we were there for a while. It was a really tricky anchorage. Me and Mano was my first mate. We had to re-anchor Falcon like 3 different times because there's rocks on the bottom, and it was just really sketchy. And you get that feeling, like you say, if you're not happy, don't leave the boat. You get that sort of like captain's instinct. It's like, if I am ashore and I can't see the boat, I get really stressed out. Well, this guy did not have that instinct at all. So I'm like dinghying into shore, and I thought to myself, they must have left because they were talking about leaving and the boat wasn't there. And as I'm dinghying into shore, I'm going to go for a run. Here comes the dad sprinting out like the breakwater. He saw me. He's like, Andy, my boat's gone. I'm like, yep, your boat is gone. And I was like, wait a minute. So he thought it was stolen. I was like, no, there's no way it was stolen. So I go up into shore, and I'm like, okay, his family there, they have 2 young kids, his wife. I said, look, get in the dinghy, let's go. And I'm trying to find a power boat. It was getting dark. It's like the sun was going to be down in about an hour. And, offshore Barbados, it's just ocean. You're like 100 miles maybe east of the rest of the Eastern Caribbean. So we're like, we better actually, if we're going to go look for this boat, we better just do it on Falcon, because if we go out here in some rib or something and we get far away and now we run out of gas, now we're going to exacerbate this problem. So Mano gets Falcon ready to go. We start motoring downwind. You couldn't see anything. Like, there was no boat on the horizon. It was gone. So we start motoring just downwind. That's the only place to look. And we said, I think it was Mano, I'll give him credit for this. He's like, hey, and I asked, I forget what the guy's name is, but I asked, hey, did you leave the instruments on? Did you leave AIS on? Whatever. Nope, didn't leave any of that on. Everything was turned off. So Mano goes, let's turn the radar on and see if we see a target. And sure enough, like maybe 6 miles in the opposite direction, not the opposite direction, but like 45 degrees from where we were going, just downwind, we saw a target. Like, okay, this is our only, we have to go there. It didn't have AIS, so we're like, okay, that checks a box. So we changed direction, started headed for this target. And as we're getting closer and closer, we get the binoculars, like, oh yeah, it's a sailboat, doesn't have any sails up. And Mano and I, so the guy was driving Falcon, Mano and I are at the front of the cockpit, and he looks over at me, he goes, this is really not cool, but this is kind of cool. It was a pretty cool adventure. And then he also said, Mano's like, this guy, he is way too unstressed for the situation that is unfolding. Like, he has no idea how that if we weren't there, he would have lost his boat and his home and everything. And sure enough, we get there. We're now off the top north coast of the island, like in 6-foot swell. Sun's going down. It was his boat. The anchor's hanging over the front. Everything's out just like he left it. And I sent him and Mano over in our dinghy, and they got on board, pulled the anchor up, and then we motored back in. The boat was 7 miles away in about 3 hours. It had drifted on the current because it was not downwind. It was like across the wind. It had gone off the north end of the island, and it was on its way to Martinique. And we got it just as the sun went below the horizon. It was just light. We came back, and we didn't have any contact with his wife because her phone didn't work. So she didn't know. We get back, we anchor, we go back into the little yacht club restaurant where the wife and kids were hanging out. She's like, so what happened? We're like, we found your boat. It's back. So, and I was like, all right. And he admitted, he's like, they'd been cruising for 2 years from Europe, but they'd been marina hopping. He's like, in 2 years, they probably only anchored 15 times. And he didn't understand any of the stuff that you were just talking about, didn't leave out enough scope, didn't have that instinct that you need to have. He has it now. And that was the story. So that was a proud moment. What's that? What? Last year cruising. I mean, yeah, this just happened. This happened this year. In fact, we saw them in Amsterdam. I went to join Mia after one of the trips, and we saw them again. They made it back all the way to Amsterdam, and yeah, I'm not sure if he ever anchored after that.
Nice. He sounded like he wasn't very stressed. I think when people drag on board, they're a little bit more in shock. We had brief story. We had a guy that we were anchored in. I think it was the Canaries. No, was it Canaries? And anchored in front of us, a group of guys that were probably crossing the Atlantic that year, and we were anchored behind them, and the wind came up. Anyways, we saw them started to drag past us, and what you do is go out and yell as much as you can and try and wake somebody up, and oftentimes what they'll yell back is, "You're dragging," as they drag past you. And you're like, I physically can't drag upwind, right? But it's yeah, if you're in shock. Anyway, these guys all came out in their underwear, and one of them was brushing his teeth. They were in complete shock. We had a German-speaking guy on board that was able to communicate with them and get their engine started, but shock can definitely take over. All right, so in summary here, we're about to go transition. We're going to have about a 10 or 15 minute break. Is that right, Andy? Yep, and then we're going to set up the stage for our panel. So get a coffee, get a bathroom. We distilled our presentation down to this. So it's a distilled, double distilled here. These are the tips. If anything, you're going to write something down. Write these tips down, and then you'll be able to know where to start on your own journey. And we'll see you guys in 15 minutes. All right, thank you.
Let's have the lights, please, Adam. Cool, we're back. Where are we at here? I love doing these panel discussions. What we're trying to do here, I'm going to introduce a topic and a question, and I kind of almost decided to scrap my outline I have because you guys have sent in so many good questions throughout the day. I'm going to get to a lot of those. A lot of those cover some themes in here as well. But the point of this is, I'm going to ask a question to someone specifically on the panel. They're going to start with their opinion on that question, and then hopefully everybody else jumps in and offers their own opinion on that. The livelier this is, the better. Quick introductions. I'm Andy. We have Blue. We have Brady. We have Heather. Brady, do you just want to give a quick introduction to Heather since she worked with you guys, and I only met Heather about
right
5 minutes ago?
Yeah. Well, what can you say about Heather? We usually describe her as a complete badass. She started sailing at, the age of 4, probably? Yep, lived on boats her whole life. She's raised 3 children on her own boat, cruising, and she also helped build and captain the Matthew Turner, which is a 136-foot tall ship in Sausalito. So she runs our women's courses for Cruisers Academy down in Mexico now.
Awesome.
One more little fun thing about Heather, she just had a son graduate from high school, and as his graduation present, they raced the Pac Cup double-handed from San Francisco to Hawaii, so she's a pretty cool mom.
Hell yeah. Heather, we got to do podcasts. And then we have Mia, who is struggling to speak.
I'll do my best.
And, of course, Captain August at the end of the table there.
Hello.
All right, Mia, you get the first question. This may be your last question, depending on how this goes. A lot of people ask, and this is a common question we get with crew, with people at the booth, with things. Everybody wants to know how you handle fear at sea. So, Mia, I'm going to ask you specifically, what is the most nervous you've ever been at sea? Was that actually scared? And was it due to external conditions or your internal conditions? Like, was it actually something to be scared of, or were you just nervous for the sake of being nervous? And how did you handle that?
I'm thinking back to the early days when it was you and me, and I think it was our second season on Isbjörn. And it didn't start scary, and it just felt a little bit uncomfortable, like almost a little seasick. And we thought you had eaten something bad. And then pretty quickly, we realized that it was getting worse and worse. And 2 hours later, you were in your bunk with a fever. And we had been in contact. As soon as we started symptoms, we went in touch with a doctor. And it turned out that it's either you just have a gas or you're gonna die. So we very quickly, and we just had left Cape May. We couldn't go back. So we were instead of going up to Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, we started going over to Newport. And it was pretty bad pretty quickly, so I had to take over as the captain of the boat, and I wasn't really nervous at the time, but I think I was nervous without knowing it. And then when we came into Newport, Andy had an appendicitis, and that's something that is like out of your control, but also really scary at sea. I think
we were 100 miles offshore when I started feeling sick, and I was like, all right, that's going to be, 18, 24 hours till we get in. And by the time we passed Block Island, I was like, can they send a effing boat, please? Like, I am miserable. And Mia's like, yeah, we're almost there.
Yeah, but anyway, so that's something that you can mitigate with having good med kit and stuff and antibiotics and everything. But we were luckily close enough that we could do it. But that, to me, is one of the scariest things that can happen. And it did happen. So we always ask on our medical form now if you have an appendix or not. Because then you can outrule that if you would have stomach pain.
Yeah, that was not scary for me, just painful. They picked me up in an ambulance on the dock, took me to the hospital, and I had surgery like that morning. So it was not just gas. I did have a problem. Does anybody else have a similar story where you felt actually scared at sea, and was that fear justified?
I had a pretty bad experience once where we had, up in the Arctic, in the winter, we had like 80 knots katabatic winds in one of the fjords up there, like sustained. And in a full like canopy covered Bavaria with like a full group of divers on board. Like the only reason to go sailing up there in the winter is the whales. So there's tons of whales. So we did these diving and sailing trips with the whales. And yeah, this crazy weather hit us, and like the boat was not set up to handle any kind of weather like that, and it was pretty rough, and there was a million things going on. And I remember at that time, I thought ahead, like, okay, we have like 5 days left of this trip, and then I need to bring the boat back to the port. There we go, and then I can have my little breakdown. Like then I can just sort of, fall apart for a little bit. That's cool then, and then I'll be okay. So I kind of just planned ahead, very very strategic there. Never happened though. By the time I just fixed everything, it was kind of decompressed. But yeah, that was probably the worst
Well,
I ever felt.
has your guys for Brady and Blue you made a good point there, August, about like, okay, you're scared, but when do you express that? Has that changed for you guys going from like liveaboard cruising on DELOS with just a bunch of friends to now you're in a different situation in a leadership role where you kind of have to like look the part?
Yeah, I mean, it's changed huge. I think we overlooked a lot of stuff in the early days that we probably shouldn't have. And it goes back to the communication of checking in with people and being like, the moment you feel sick, tell somebody. Because you don't know if it turns into appendicitis or it's just gas. You have no idea what it is. But starting early and often with logging things, we've learned a lot over the years. I got sick so many times on DELOS that I probably should have gone to a hospital and just kind of like put it off and put it off and put it off. And luckily, all of them worked out okay. But I wish we would have taken it a little bit more seriously.
Heather, you don't strike me as the kind of person that gets afraid.
I don't get scared.
No, but for real, or how do you handle it? How do you manage it? I mean, Matt wrote, I asked Matt's done these panels before, and Matt, he tells you he gets afraid, but he doesn't experience fear in the same way. It's clear. So do you experience fear, and how do you handle it?
I very much experience fear after the fact. I had this is not sailing related, but the same son who sailed with me to Hawaii was run over by a truck, and on the 4th of July, and luckily it was the 4th of July, and the fire department was right there, and they airlifted us to Children's Hospital, and we almost lost him. We did lose him in the helicopter, and then they brought him back to life, basically. And he said to me, like, a year later, he's like, "Mom, why didn't you ever cry for me? Do you not really care?" And then I cried. Like, the PTSD from, having lived through that experience and just, like, holding on for a long time, not knowing whether he was going to make it, you do what you have to do in the moment to make sure that they make it, or make sure that the boat makes it, or, make sure that you're doing everything that you possibly can in that moment. And then the fear is put off until later when it's all over and there's nothing to be afraid of anymore.
Yeah, and I probably felt the same thing with Andy when he got sick. You're just managing the situation, you don't really feel this, but then afterwards it's like, holy crap, that could have been really, really bad. But yeah, and it was on 4th of July. It was morning of 4th of July, so everyone was ready at the hospital, but no one had gotten sick yet. So he was like first in, first served, yeah.
I think people are afraid if they're gonna be afraid. Like, afraid to be put in that situation. How am I gonna react? Because, like, it's easy for us to sit up here and say, yeah, well, I didn't feel it in the moment, but I felt it later. Well, how do you not feel it in the moment? And what, then you get to the deeper question, like, what is fear? Like, I've always said, it's easy not to be, like, fear stems from a lack of knowledge. So if you know what to do in all these, in any given situation, you won't be afraid because you'll act. And if you don't know what to do, I would say action always quells fear. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, and I was also going to say that I think that's when if you have a crew on the boat, if something is going on, keeping the open communication and having the crew involved in the situation creates less fear among the crew. Like when you had your appendicitis, the whole crew was involved in the situation from the beginning, and that created an environment of everyone had the same knowledge. And I think that's something to remember because it's easy to forget to communicate with everyone else.
I think also, a lot of the situations that I've been in where I probably should have been afraid, we had practiced. And so practice is really, really important. I was at a conference where I think it was Paul Carrot or some really famous sailor, was giving a talk to a bunch of racers. We were about to go out on this big race, and this guy raised his hand and says, I've got this, I've got that, I've done this to my boat, I've done that, and that what should I do between now and the race? What else should I do? What am I missing? And Paul says, get on a laser and go sailing every single day. And he's right, you know, like there's nothing, I mean, that's how I became a good sailor. At age 4, I was just out there tooling around, catching turtles and filling my cockpit with turtles. But, you know, every time I saw another turtle, I had to jibe. I had to do a man overboard practice and scoop that turtle up. And, you know, there's nothing better than really practicing your skills, because then when you do get in those situations, you can afford to not be afraid or defer the fear till later and just think through, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? What do I need to do?
August, I know you guys deal with a lot of heavy weather, and people are afraid of heavy weather, and that's one of the big fears. And I want you to just speak for a second on, like, when you're in that situation, you can just stop. When it gets scary, when it gets overwhelming, you can just stop. I think you know what I'm talking about. Can you describe that?
Yeah, that's cool. That's a cool little demonstration that you can do if people are really, really nervous, especially like if you're going upwind or even on a beam reach and you know, touching 30, 40 knots and things are really heavy. People get nervous often, and that's a good time to demonstrate what going downwind does to the boat. Just crack off, and suddenly, like, it's a completely different world. Like, the apparent wind is down, the wave, the frequency that the waves hit your boats are down, and it's just a completely different experience. The heel stops, and suddenly the crew realizes, like, oh, like we're going through this on purpose. Like we want to be going through this. We don't have to, but we do it because we want to. So that's a really good way of demonstrating that. So we do that sometimes, just kind of make sure that people understand that we're in control of the situation. I think it's also really important in that, you know, heavy weather, crew nervousness situation is that the mood of the skipper becomes the mood of the crew. If the skipper's afraid or nervous or stressed out, that's very infectious. So it's a good idea to you know, be aware of that when you're the skipper. And I had another time we were out in some big weather out in an Atlantic crossing. We had like 40 knots plus, and one of the crew turned to me and she said, like, "Hey, August, I think I might freak out." And I was like, "Oh, okay," you know. And I like you said, like, it's all about you know, if you don't understand what's going on, that's when it's scary, right? And so I try to tell her, like, you know, everything's going on, it's fine. And she later told me that the thing that really made her calm down was then when I went to take a nap afterwards. Like, none of the things that I said helped at all. But then I went to just lay down. I said, I'm just going to lay down for a minute. And she thought, okay, August is going to sleep. Apparently, this is fine. This is not bad. So, yeah, I think those signals that you give off is very important.
So, ironically, one of the questions that just came in was, what do you do if someone does have a freak out on the boat?
Yeah, good question.
Go for a nap.
Go for a nap. Yeah, there you go. I've never experienced that before, but you know, I think at that point you have already failed. Like the maintenance thing, you need to manage expectations in a way that people won't freak out. And luckily, that's how, if you kind of do your homework and do your weather routing properly and analyze the forecast, even like a heavy weather situation is not going to come as a surprise to you. You have days of preparations, both physically preparing the boat and also mentally preparing the crew for any kind of stuff like that. So yeah, I think if you're at the point where your crew is actually freaking out, it might be a little too late.
This is a perfect segue because we're on the topic of leadership here. Heather, this one's for you to start the discussion. How does the dynamic change depending on the skipper, whether it's an all-male crew versus a mixed crew versus an all-female crew, and how do we like manage the dynamic of the different personalities on the boat? Because that's like probably the single most important thing about, you guys touched on it, living in a cooped-up place. So Heather, if you just want to get us started on how do you manage the crew dynamics with a variety of different people effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish gender wasn't an issue we had to talk about, but it is. I think I think when you've got, in my experience, when you have a female skipper and a mixed gender crew, sometimes women have to work a lot harder to prove themselves. And especially in my generation, it was like that. It was like the stakes were really high. I never wanted to be the girl that did something wrong, you know, because it felt like I just already stuck out a little bit, and then I, you know, didn't want it to be blamed on my gender that I did something wrong, so I had to be like extremely good. And so I think there's still a lot of women feel that kind of pressure, and so they often will like hang back. So one of the things that I've done, even on the tall ship, I run a crew of like 12 or 15 young people and some volunteers, and I will often assign the sort of the opposite gender roles to folks. Like we've got female engineers and male cooks, and you know, we just kind of like mix. I purposely think about the gender roles and work to break them down a little bit, and I work to people's strengths. So if I know that there's a guy on board who loves to cook, he's the cook, you know. But I do consider gender sometimes in that, and you once everyone gets to know each other, then you all just become people, and it's gender becomes a non-issue. But I think when it's a new group of people, it sometimes you have to work a little harder to draw the women forward into roles that they might not be as comfortable with, and empower them with skills that make them good at those roles, and not make assumptions about what everybody's skill set is when they come in the room. Those assumptions can be really depowering in a way, so you have to really think about it consciously. And I wish that more people had thought about it consciously when I was younger, because I wasn't given a lot of opportunities on big boats that I wish I had had at a younger age. I kind of was stuck with the dinghy sailing and dinghy coaching for a long time. But then, yeah, it took a while to like break into the big boat stuff. And so if you are in a mixed crew, take a minute to think about and ask everybody, what are your strengths? What do you feel good at? And what do you want to learn? And sometimes it's just a question of like giving someone a task that they don't know how to do, so they get that opportunity to learn it. And then you get to find out what people really are good at. And often what they think they're good at is not, and what they really are good at is a surprise, and that's great, and go with it.
That's what you said, what they think they're good at and they're not. Someone asked a question about what are the best types of crew when you're coming in, and what are like the worst types, what are the most difficult to deal with. And August and I were just kind of whispering up here in the corner that the worst types of people are the ones that come in thinking they know everything and actually don't. They claim all this experience, whatever, and they don't want to learn. They just don't want to learn. And I think that's also the most dangerous type of person, where, you know, you said you can go down for a nap. When you've got people like that on board, it's much, much harder to nap, because you're not sure they're going to make the right decisions, nor will they ask for help. So I think that humility is probably the biggest, my best kind of crew attribute. If you come humble, then I know that you're going to work in the group.
I think that also can be sometimes that people can feel a little bit insecure, and they feel like they have to prove themselves. So from the leadership, from the skipper side, if they can open up an environment, we do that on the boat, that it's okay to ask questions, there's no dumb questions, everyone is on the same level, that takes away a little bit of insecurity, and I think that brings people, this makes it a more open environment, because people tend to be a bad version of themselves if they're nervous.
Mia, what did you, like, you sail on Falcon in mixed crew and you do the women's trips. What's the difference? How is the dynamic different between those trips? Is it different?
I think the dynamic is, I think a lot of people who join a women trip may feel that they haven't been in an environment where they feel safe enough, or like they haven't felt that they have gotten an opportunity, and that's why they join a women crew, and they know it's going to be a safe environment, and I think they may feel a little bit more open to try things in an all-female crew. But I think I really enjoy both types of trips, and I don't really see a difference in the skill level of people who are joining either trip. It's more just of an insecurity level, and I think that's just a little gateway for people who may not want to take the step in joining a mixed crew. They feel safer to join a women crew, and I think that's really cool to see people really. I think people who join a women crew may get a big journey because they really realize, like, holy crap, I know what I'm doing and this is awesome, and they may have felt a little bit more insecure when they join.
Something that I've seen teaching couples together, like we teach a lot on smaller boats on Lake Tahoe, and I so many times have seen where the wife is on the tiller, right, and then the husband's sitting behind her, and he's supposed to be working the main sheet. And then suddenly I'll look back, and he actually has his hand on the tiller behind her, and she thinks she's steering, and she's not, and he's steering. And so I started making a joke, if I catch you doing that, you have to jump in the water. I don't know if you've ever been to Lake Tahoe, but it's pretty cold, so it usually helps solve the problem. But again, it just ties back to why are you doing that? Like, if this is the person you're going to be sailing with, don't you want them to actually understand? But it starts to become really complicated. These people have been married for 20, 30, 40 years, and it's really hard to get in there and cut through those dynamics and those layers when they have 40 years of operating in this way. And so, yeah, pushing each other to really become the best crew that you can be is crucial. And I've also experienced personally that women learn in a different way than men, and sometimes need a little more encouragement or coaching. And so I think that finding an instructor that works really well for you can go a really long way. If you go sailing and you don't like the instructor and you didn't learn something, don't give up. Just go find someone that works for you.
This is a perfect segue to if we shift off a little bit of leadership and more to the knowledge base. How do we gain knowledge? The four of us had a kind of a philosophical meeting a few months ago because ASA approached us to say, hey, you guys want to offer ASA certification, ASA accreditation? And we had a serious conversation about this, and we decided not to do that. So, Blue, I'll start with you on this discussion. What is your take on the, not just ASA, but U.S. Sailing, the accreditation where it's not like a commercial skipper's license versus going to a school like you guys have or coming on a trip like us that is independent and doesn't work within those? Why did we choose to do that, and what's your take on that?
Yeah, I guess I want to answer this one delicately because people here have probably taken ASA and U.S. Sailing and don't want to knock on them at all. I mean, they've taught so many people to sail, and it's a great organization, but there is reasons why none of us have decided to do it. It's an idea that we, I think, flirt with constantly and talk about, but also, when we started our sailing school, we had to consider it. And to be honest, the reason that we didn't, our other skipper, John Totten, who was an ASA instructor for, I don't know, probably 15 plus years, we had a conversation with him, and he encouraged us not to do it because he had spent so much time teaching these courses, and he felt frustrated, we're out sailing and the wind's good and we only have so much time, and I'd really be out there teaching these practical skills, and instead people are inside taking a test about vocabulary, which isn't really the best use of time.
Best use.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think it opens up more flexibility too.
Yeah.
That when people join us, we can talk about what's actually happening in the situation rather than following a strict curriculum to just push through people to make good on the test.
Yeah.
And you really have the flexibility then to just look outside and see what's happening.
Yeah. And I think too, people are gonna get whatever they want to out of the experience. So some people come take our courses and they have a cruising plan, they have 5 years and they're ready to go. So they're up at 8 a.m. and they're like, what are we doing? You're like, okay, let's get into it right away. And they're gonna walk away with so much information, right? The people that are open to learning. And so they can really get a lot out of it. Some people come and they kind of want a vacation and they kind of want to learn. Well, that's fine too. They're going to get what they get out of it. So having that flexibility, I think, just includes more people. And maybe someone goes on one trip and it's kind of a vacation, and then they realize they're actually more serious about sailing. So it just opens the door to more people.
The tricky part is, if you want to charter a boat in Europe, you have to have a certificate of competency and stuff, and that's something that I don't know if you guys are able to offer that. We don't.
It's just Croatia, the only place.
There's a couple places that you got to have certificates, and that's kind of the thing. But Do you have anything else to add on this topic, Brady?
Yeah, well, the ICC, that's the one that
Yeah.
we've considered the most, and it allows people to bareboat charter. And the fact about a lot of the sailing schools that exist, they're all self-accredited, and they've been doing great marketing over the years of you're required to have this to charter a boat, you're required to have that. And the fact is, there's only very few places in the world where you need this ICC thing. Most places, if you show up and you show them your sailing resume and you have a credit card, here's the keys to the boat. Seriously, like the amount of people I've seen get on a boat that have taken their ASA courses and they do it in a week. You're just like, okay, that's not who they should be giving boats to. But yeah, I think it comes down to experience.
And on the other thing too, we're not teaching docking, for example. Like we're not
Well,
gonna let
for
people
yeah.
dock Falcon 65 feet into the harbors. That's just something you have to learn somewhere else. But
I love that you mentioned that because we have the same thing. We don't teach docking. Like LINTIKA is a nightmare to dock. She only backs in one direction. So you're like, all right, this is kind of boat specific. But yeah, it's hard to check those boxes sometimes.
All right, Brady, we're going to give the people what they want. We're going to start talking about gear and equipment. I'm going to ask I'm going to get you started here. What is your just like must-have like piece of tech? We've talked a lot about philosophy, leave all that shit behind, but like, come on.
Yeah. Piece of tech.
Or just
tool or
equipment.
something.
A
Okay.
piece of gear that requires maintenance that is worth having on the boat, even despite all the hassle.
Most of my favorite things are tools specific for a job. A couple of those that off the top of my head are a long endoscope with a camera on the end is great for medical reasons as well. But seriously, the amount of times I've used this thing to go look around a corner to find something leaking or into a bilge or to get to something, they're great to have. Forceps are also really good to have. We talked about heads earlier, and heads love to break, so having a pair of forceps, long forceps, being able to reach for things is great. But as far as my favorite tech item to use, I think I'm just really surprised at how far things have come on pads and phones. And I think people don't give it a lot of attention. A lot of people go straight to, I need the really expensive chart plotter, and it needs to be installed. And those are great and fine, but the reality is a lot of the times they're giving you inaccurate information too. So it goes back to redundancy of having different systems. I always have an iPad right next to my chart plotter, and they're both running independently. In Mexico, for example, we were down there trying to find an anchorage, and it showed that the boat was on land on our big expensive unit that's there, and then on my phone on Navionics it's exactly right on, and it shows my boat speed and everything's perfect. So I think the tech side of things, how far things are coming with apps and useful tools are my favorite at the moment.
August, what about you? Favorite piece of kit?
I'm very excited about my new 360 camera, which is a Garmin Verb camera, which is discontinued, sadly. But I think that is going to be a game changer in the kind of way that we can teach stuff, because it connects to the Garmin chart plotter that we now have on Espion, and all of the data that the chart plotter sits on is added to the metadata of the video of that little camera, so I can film everything and then overlay boat speed, depth, wind speed, wind angle, graphs, everything.
Can't you even do your heart rate if you're wearing the Garmin watch?
That's right.
how
That's
stressed
right.
were you in this
How
situation?
actually stressed were you, August?
Can you imagine, like, you have a sketchy docking or anchoring situation, and you have like all of this graphs here, and Ken there actually just hooked me up with the Garmin watch as well. So
Do you mount the camera and then
yeah,
have
we can
everything
do-
overlaid, or
What's that?
do you mount the camera somewhere and then
You can
record,
mount it, or you
or
can just carry it around.
yeah, and it just overlays over the top?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And you can add all the. This is getting very technical now. Sorry about that. But you can. It's not like printed on the video. It's just added to the metadata, so you can change it, move it around in the editing phase, and it's pretty cool. So
I gotta say, I was an anti-water maker. I was the guy that you described, like, I want to row ashore and catch rainwater and all this stuff. Man,
Well, we did that on our first trip.
we did. We went across the Atlantic in 2011 catching rainwater. 23 days, and we had 30 gallons of water in the tank to start with. But man, a water maker is so nice. Oh my God. It is so nice. It's worth all the energy consumption. It's worth all the maintenance, changing filters. It is so awesome. You never have to go to the dock. Like, if you're not you're not using that much fuel usually, so like you never have to go to the dock. It's the best.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about water maker for offshore sailing, but I think even for cruising, if you have the room and if you have the capacity on your boat to have one, like you said, you don't have to go ashore, you don't have to hunt for water. You can actually be more independent, especially in countries where there may be water shortage. You don't have to use the local resources of water.
Yeah, well, even in Sweden and Marstrand, you weren't allowed to wash your boat with the local water supply because they were on a water restriction. So, like, we got water maker, we can wash the boat. But I want to say to my thing on boat equipment, I touched on this a little bit when we talked about the batteries and the induction cooking and stuff. I prioritize, like, quality of life on board when it comes to how you're going to outfit the system. So when we built Falcon, we actually had the thought that we were going to do induction cooking. We didn't for two reasons. One, I already explained, the decoupling systems. But the other was we had this giant battery bank, and we said, all right, we can take all this energy and use it for cooking, or we can keep the propane set up the way it is, and we can stretch out the time it takes between having to charge the batteries. So when you're disconnected from shore power, your whole life revolves around how much time can I get out of the batteries and how quickly can I recharge them. So with lithium batteries and modern alternators, you can really set up a system now where you're almost never charging the batteries specifically to charge the batteries, or never running the engine just to charge the batteries. Because these big alternators and the lithium is so efficient at accepting energy that in the time it takes to motor in and out of harbor, get the anchor up in and out of the dock, that's putting enough juice in the batteries to get you going. I think you probably see this on because you do more coastal cruising than we do on Falcon, that you have a lithium bank, 1,000 amp hours or something, a 300 amp alternator, and you never have to run the engine just to charge. And it's such a change in lifestyle. And what happens now with lithium, again, boat show salespeople is happening now, you have all this extra power, so you think you can just add all these extra things. Well, sure, you can, but now you still have the same problem. You got to charge the engine all the time. If you look at it the other way around and think, all right, what's my quality of life actually going to be like? If you never have to turn that engine on to charge, it's just so much nicer. And thinking about that energy management. So I think my favorite piece of equipment is the fact that we can design these electrical systems and charging systems to have that quality of life, not to have all the other stuff.
Yeah, I would say I want to change my answer. I'm mostly excited about the lithium batteries. It is fantastic. 1,200 amp hours of lithium is just it never runs out. Like it's like a complete non-issue. Even like we had on one of the trips that I did earlier, we had the alternator broke on me like the day before we were gonna start the trip. I wasn't even worried about it because we had shore power. The bank was full. We could have sailed like a week without having to do any charging at all. So it's a fantastic.
This is another topic we could spend a whole weekend on, nerding out on electrical stuff, because it's really fun. Additional to that, last thing I'll say is we have a Watt and C hydro generator on both boats, and we do so much long distance sailing. If you're going to do actual long distance sailing, that thing, like I sailed across the Atlantic, that same trip where we found the guy's boat in Barbados just in February. 11 days across the Atlantic, I never started the engine at all, because that kept up all the energy needs, even with running the radar, the instruments, the fridge, the freezer, all that stuff. So having some means of regeneration was amazing at sea, and those things are really efficient. Doesn't work when you're anchored, so not so efficient there. So that's my take on that. All right, one question I have to ask. Shout out to Aiden, who's running the live stream. Aiden asked, August, this is for you. How do I stop looking at boat listings?
You don't.
Yeah, you don't. That's a tough one. I don't know. You know, like gouge your eyes out or something. I think maybe, but you're only like the only times I've ever stopped looking at boat listings has been like very deliberately when I've just bought a boat, because then you're so scared of like finding that like crap, there it is. I should have gotten that one instead. So I think
buy a boat.
Buy a boat. There you go.
What did you say? Yeah, but what did you say about the worst part about buying a boat is that the shopping is over?
Yeah, that is the fact. So actually, when you're shopping a boat, it's just enjoy it. It's a good time. You're living in this kind of superposition where all the boats you're looking at could be your boat, and it's fantastic.
Schrodinger's boat.
And then once you what's that?
Schrodinger's boat.
That's exactly right. Yeah. When you buy a boat, the waveform collapses, and you're stuck with that one. So yeah.
All right, we're gonna go to the grab bag here a little bit. Blue, this one's for you. Can you describe a time, this is one of the audience questions. Sorry, I didn't write down whose name this was. Can you describe a time that you learned from a mistake or a failure? How do you handle mistakes at sea, both in the moment and after the fact? I don't make mistakes, is what she's thinking.
No, that's not true. I don't know. Yeah, I guess just being okay with making mistakes, maybe. One that just popped into my mind, I remember when I first got on DELOS and we sailed to St. Helena, and I was doing something on the electrical board, clearly didn't know what I was doing, and I managed to turn off all the freezers on the boat. And we were like halfway across our passage and a bunch of the meat defrosted. And yeah, that was a bummer. So I kind of felt like an idiot, but and it kind of wore on me. But just realizing, like, you know, people make mistakes, and the more time you spend on boats, the more mistakes you'll make, but the more that you'll learn too. So I always just tell people, like, nautical miles. Like, the more nautical miles you can get, the better. And you will make mistakes. But yeah, just being with good crew too, and finding the people that you can learn from goes a long way.
The only actual mistake you can make is not learning from your mistakes.
Nice.
Well said.
Good one.
Have a good one. Do you have a good mistake?
I
did a stupid
many
mistake.
mistakes.
I did a stupid mistake on Ice Bear one time. I popped a ball of olive oil on the stove, just very quickly. And if you guys have been on Ice Bear, it's like a big salon. The whole bottle of olive oil spilled on the floor. And the more I tried to wipe it up, the more I polished the floor, and the more slippery it got. Stupid mistake that popped into my head. Don't spill olive oil.
But Mia, what did you learn from that mistake?
Don't spill olive oil. Oil is slippery.
I did a good one too. I bought my first larger vessel, and thought I knew the San Francisco Bay well enough to go off on my own, and I anchored on the east side of Angel Island, and it was a hot day, and I jumped in the water, and by the time I popped back up, I was like 5 boat lengths away from my boat, and I had jumped right into a ripping current without realizing it. And barely made it to a point that I could see in the distance, and I had to walk about, 5 miles upwind to get back, or up current to get back to my boat. And then I had to sit there and figure out how was I going to actually get back to my boat in the same current. And then throwing leaves on the surface, watching them go, which way is it going? And yeah, ridiculously unsafe, stupid move. So we all make them, just got to figure out how you're going to get over it and learn from it.
I had a good one from here in Annapolis last summer. This, you ask, what do you learn from your mistakes? This is not the first time this has happened, so I'm not sure if I learned anything, but...
We call it lesson identified.
Lesson identified, yeah. So I was out with Falcon, out on Falcon with some friends just for a weekend here between trips last summer. And we were down on the South River. It was Father's Day, it was a Sunday, it was flat calm, beautiful weather, tons of boats out. And we were just motoring from the South River, which is just one peninsula south of Annapolis, around Thomas Point into the harbor here. And I grew up sailing on the bay, and my first career was sailing here on woodwind. So we were in and out of Annapolis Harbor 150 times a summer. But Falcon draws 11 feet. Well, all the boats I grew up on are much shallower boats. And what tends to happen when you're sort of out of that leadership mode and with friends is you tend to just relax a little bit, your guard's not up, and we motored at 6 knots right onto a shoal, right outside Horn Point out here in the mud. And Falcon, I can't almost do this without telling the Axel likes to hear this as a bedtime story. So, and we do the little sound effects, so telling this, I'm almost like, Falcon got stuck in the mud. So, and we were stuck, and we were so stuck, and we tried everything. There was just a little bit of breeze. We put the jib out, tried to heel the boat over, and I'm like, and that boat is the biggest boat on the bay, and it is very conspicuous. And here we are right outside the harbor on Father's Day. There's boats everywhere. So, I'm friends with Jen, who runs the Woodwind. She's the owner of the Woodwind. And I texted her, I was like, Jen, if you're working today, please be nice to me when you sail by Falcon that is hard aground, because we need to get a tow, and we're waiting on the towboat. So she was working that day. She sails out, they tack by, and she was like, up in Woodwind only draws 7 feet, so this shoal wasn't a problem for them. So she tacked by about half a boat length away and got the whole boat. Instead of making fun of me, she got the whole boat to go Happy Father's Day. So, so what did I learn from that? Yeah, pay attention when somebody needs to be in charge. That's the risk of having multiple captains on the boat. There's no captain on the boat, and that's what happened that day. And it was a $2,000 tow later, and we got freed, and a little bit of bruising to my ego. So there you go. All right. I'm looking at the questions that are coming in here. This is a good one. I'll give this one to you, Brady, because you mentioned on DELOS you had that rigging issue like right before you were going to go across the Indian Ocean. So this is from Michael, asks, what are your passage bailout rules? What conditions or situations would cause you to not depart on a passage?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it really boils down to how comfortable you are personally with your boat and your crew. We have a rule on board that usually the most conservative answer or the decision is usually what we go with. So if we have a crew on board that is adamant about not going out in a certain condition or something, then we just won't do it. You just do it another day. At the top end of things, if you're practicing, heavy sea maneuvers and you're practicing heaving to and stuff, then it's really good to go out in those conditions. So I don't think I have a specific cutoff or anything like that. It really depends on who you're with and what boat you're in specifically.
Go, you gonna say something, Blue?
I was just gonna say, thinking of times where we've pushed back our leave date is when we've had crew on board that we didn't feel safe crossing an ocean with, because it's just like exactly what August was saying. I think we would have a story to tell to that question earlier about if someone actually lost it, right? And then you're in the middle of an ocean, it could have been really, really bad. So identifying that ahead of time made for a very different experience. But yeah, we pushed our departure date back, and they ultimately didn't come on the trip, which was a really hard decision to make, but ultimately the right one.
August, we don't have that luxury. If we push our trips back, it means the end of the business, because our trips string together one after another, and we break that cardinal rule. Someone else asked a question in here about, like, we do kind of what a rally does. It's like you're not supposed to sail to a schedule. You're not supposed to set dates. Well, I can tell you exactly where our boats are going to be sailing and exactly when for the next 2 years. And that's like, you're not supposed to do that. So how do we avoid that?
Well, we choose our passages and our kind of calendars very thoroughly based on knowledge of the weather systems and the seasons, and to avoid the worst situations. And then what we also do is that we build in extra days into the passages where we might have to wait for a weather window, giving us some opportunities to move things around a little bit. And I guess ultimately we're prepared for heavy weather if that is the alternative. Like sometimes, like you said with the women's trip, sometimes you gotta go upwind in 35 knots, and that's if you have the boat and the crew and the leadership to do so. It's fine. You can do that. It's uncomfortable, but
I mean, I think that's a good example though of like Mia, your trip. If you want to just describe that, 7 out of 8 were seasick the first day.
Yeah, so we had a window. We had a couple days to wiggle room on the passage, and we looked at the weather. And ideally, like Andy said, you want to start the trip in a calm weather when you have time to acclimatize. But we had the situation: we could either leave on day X, like tomorrow, and have the first night really heavy upwind, but then it would turn around and we would have a really good passage down, so it would only last for the night. Or if we waited, we would have a nice start to the trip, but then we would have 3 days with really heavy upwind. And we picked, it was better to do it right off the bat and then have better weather down the line. And we briefed the crew, and we did a day of sail training beforehand, so everyone got to know the boat and got familiar with the boat. So we took that day in Norway to really get everyone ready. And people knew about it, everyone got ready. We started off, and sure enough, one by one, the buckets were passing around, buckets were hanging, buckets were over. Me and Nikki and one other crew member were not seasick, and 7 out of the 8 crew were sick, but most of them were sick, but also able to stand a watch. They got up on the helm. They went to what they call the meditation corner, hung over the side for a little bit, had some crackers, back on the helm, over to the medication corner, and then a few went down to bed. But that was that night. And then in the morning, we started easing the sails, the wind eased off a little bit, and everyone, like one by one, color coming back in their face, and everyone had a great passage after that. And it was such a cool bonding experience too, to have that. And it wasn't unsafe, it was just uncomfortable. Because if we would have felt it was unsafe, we would have had to delay even more days and then get behind on the passage, but we didn't have to do that.
I think one takeaway maybe for you guys, because you're not, most of you probably aren't going to be starting a sailing business, and I know that before we sailed to dates, we saw you guys doing it, and we're like, how the hell do you do that? And now having done it, it is really hard, and the first season that we did it, we had to set sail down the coast of California in the biggest winter that California's had since 1952. I think some of our crew from that trip is in the room, so shout out to them for being a good sport. But it's really difficult. So for you guys, like, try not to sail to dates. If you have crew meeting you somewhere, be sure you tell them like a window of time instead of a specific date or something like that. Tell them to buy refundable tickets. Don't buy their ticket home until they have to. So try to give yourself as much leeway as possible.
The inverse of that question, August, I'll ask this to you. How do you know when your boat and you are actually ready to go offshore?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's 1,000 things, right? It's the state of the boat, state of the crew, your own headspace, the weather. It's a million things. I get a very distinct, just like a gut feeling about these things now, and which I have learned to trust. Thinking of, my brain is lagging behind a little bit. I'm now answering your questions on the kind of worst mistakes I've made. And all of those have been kind of not trusting that gut feeling, and where I have been gone out to sea kind of against my own recommendations, usually because there's been external pressure to go out. When I was cruising, it was small things, just like Zed. Like I have a buddy who's waiting for me on the next island, who's had to fly home in 2 weeks, and I don't want to disappoint them, so off you go. There's also been, pressure in a professional setting where I'm taking clients out, which have flown a long way and paid a lot of money to do something, and you don't want to upset them not going out. That was the case in that 80 knot counterbatic wind story. So yeah.
I think it comes down to you'll know if you're not ready. Like you'll know deep down, you're like, I'm just not ready for this. If you're questioning if you're ready or not, you're probably ready. People usually they know more than they think they do, I think, when they go to leave. So if you're questioning, is it time to go? Is the boat ready? I think just take a step back and plan in to go very slow, do some coastal hops, do some small things, and just take the advice from what Andy was saying.
Go ahead, Mia.
No, I was gonna say that, like, take step by step, like we always have done too. That especially when before the business, when it was just me and Andy, when we were going across the Atlantic, we didn't just say, okay, tomorrow we're gonna depart and we're gonna go across the Atlantic. We went out to anchor the first night, get away from the docks, we can have a good night's sleep. Then we went up to Newport, to Lunenburg, to St. John's, and then across. So, like, don't do the first major passage. Try to do a couple hops, because then you can at least ease into it. And you will never be ready. You're never gonna look at your checklist and say, yep, all done, now let's go. Like you will always have stuff left on the list, but you just have to come down to what's important and what's not.
Well, the dates thing too, having worked for the rallies for several years, there's a fun story of a boat that was definitely not ready. They thought they were ready, but they went to the fuel dock on the morning of the start, and they had taken the inspection hatches off the fuel tanks to clean them out. And you can probably see where this is going. They went to fill up the fuel, and they're like, man, it's taking a long time to fill these tanks up. Somebody went down below, and they had forgotten to put the inspection hatch back on, and they had filled the tanks and the bilges with diesel fuel. On the day that this event was supposed to start, they were headed from Portsmouth at the mouth of the bay to Bermuda. And they had one series of accidents after another. And actually, this is a really bad ending to the story. The boat ended up sinking in the Mediterranean. They did make it across the Atlantic, but the boat sank eventually. But so they probably weren't ready to go and probably shouldn't have gone. Maybe that was like a, hey, if you don't have a gut feeling and you fill your bilge with diesel, maybe that's the sign that says, hang on a minute. Maybe we should not do this.
It's tough to say, like, because I feel very confident in my gut feeling now, but looking back to the sailing that I did in like my early 20s, I thought I knew what I was doing, and I thought I was ready, and I went out there, and now looking back to that, like I cringe. I'm surprised I made it through. So.
Well, see, you had confidence then, and still now, and that's probably the biggest problem. You have confidence without any knowledge is really dangerous.
That's right.
All right, this is another good segue. I think I just gave away one for that person that was on that boat. I'll just present this. Any of you can answer this first, whoever comes up with something right off the bat. What is the dumbest bonehead move you've ever done? Come on, guys. This is not hard. This should not be that hard.
This might not be the dumbest, but it was pretty darn dumb. I was like super young captain in the Caribbean in my early 20s, and I was handed a 50-foot Beneteau with a bunch of people on board to take out for a week, and I had failed to do my normal round around the deck to check everything before we left, and the anchor was not pinned down on the bow. And we got out into some pretty big seas, and it jumped off the bow, took a dive with all 300 feet of chain, and that bitter end that you were talking about earlier was not a proper bitter end of rope attached to the boat. It was a shackle on the end of the chain, shackled to an eye bolt. So you can imagine with like all that pressure and weight of this huge anchor and all that chain hanging in deep water, not touching the bottom, just hanging off the bow. I couldn't undo the shackle. I used every mechanical advantage on board that I could think of with halyards and winches and multiple winches, and all I did was override winches to try to pull that thing back up, and I could not get it back on the boat. And there was no saw, there was no toolbox, there was nothing on board to cut it away. And I ended up looking at the chart and going, all right, where's the closest shallow spot to get to? And we motor sailed until that anchor finally touched the bottom. And then it took the pressure off so I could actually get it up. And when it came up, it was like this twisted piece of metal.
Oh my God.
It's just like unrecognizable as an anchor anymore. And I had to go back to the charter company and say, I'm really sorry. Tie your anchor off, people.
I had a similar anchoring story actually in New Zealand. This is back before, it was just a chartered boat before I met Mia, a couple years before I think I was 19. And same thing, I was looking at the depth sounder, and we were on the South Island in New Zealand in the Marlborough Sounds, and it's really deep there. And I'm like, oh, 30 feet, that's kind of deep, but I can anchor here. Well, in New Zealand, they use depth in meters. So it was like 90 feet deep, and I'm like, man, there's a lot of chain. What is going on here? And then the windlass either something broke, I couldn't get same thing, I couldn't get the anchor back up. Now, they had like a bolt cutter on board, so I cut it. And then the rest of that trip, actually 2 years later, Mia, when I first met her, we chartered the same boat from the same little mom and pop charter company, and they remembered me and remembered this incident. And you're supposed to call them on the radio and say like, hey, I'm anchored in this place, we're here, we're settled for the night. And I'd call them and say that, and they go, do you still have your anchor? Shit. All right, the rest of you also have dumb stories here, come on.
I'm really trying to think, and I mean, there's definitely a lot, but my brain is not working for some reason. I think the first year I was actually sailing and cruising and crossing oceans, I think we were under the assumption that the more you heal, the faster you go, and that is just very dumb and not true. And then we basically crossed the entire Pacific over trimmed on our sails and healing like crazy and going 5.5 knots. And then we finally, during a passage, eased the sails out and started figuring out the apparent wind angles and stuff. And we not only flattened out, but picked up a knot of speed and felt like a real idiot because the whole Pacific crossing was uncomfortable and we didn't need to be. So I guess the lesson from that is learn how to sail before you cross an ocean. Or at least practice before you cross an ocean. I've blown quite a few things with electrical by putting the wires in the wrong place.
I set my little personal boat at home. I set the alternator on fire by doing that.
Yeah.
When I was new alternator. Here we go. See, we're warming up now.
Yeah, a 35-foot boat. We didn't have fridge. We had no water maker, so very, very minimum. And so the dry provisioning was quite important because we didn't have a fridge. And we had packed everything away in nice Ziploc bags and everything. And the settee where we stored everything was a sliding. You slid it out in order to get to the supplies underneath. And on day 2, I realized that all the Ziploc bags I had packed away had been scraped. So all the oatmeal was the breakfast we were going to eat for the whole trip. It was a 23-day crossing. All the oatmeal bags had got scrapes in them, and molds had gotten into those bags, like moisture. So on day 4, all the oatmeal was moldy. So we had to have like pasta for breakfast. And I was like, good move, Mia. Pretty stupid.
I think back to that 80 knot wind story again. I think that was probably my biggest mistake. Because not like being out in that weather in itself was a mistake, even though there was no way I could predict it was going to be that bad. It was terrible. But I think the greatest mistake I did that day was that I was also towing a rib behind the boat, like it had a 100 horsepower outboard on it. It's like a huge rib, not a dinghy. It's huge. And we start surfing down these massive waves. Even though like in a fjord, we're in coastal sailing, it was like offshore because just the wind was so strong. And I was just towing it. It was just back there, and of course, huge breaking wave came along, and it was bizarre. Like I was at the helm, and a wave grabs the dinghy. The dinghy starts surfing. I mean, the rib starts surfing, and it kind of overtakes us. It comes like zooming past us on the side, like holy shit. And then as then the boat catches the surf and overtakes the dinghy again, the line goes slack. Suddenly, it's not slack anymore, and the rib is thrown over its side and ends up end over end in the water. And we're now towing an upside down dinghy, which was actually great because now it had like this huge like windscreen stuff, and it was like a proper boat. But that acted as a fantastic sea anchor or like a drogue. It really stabilized the ride from there on out. So, that was great.
Well, I'm sure pretty much everyone have been in a situation of thinking, should I tow the dinghy or lift it up? Let's just tow it. It's flat calm. I think that, yeah.
I've never towed anything since that time.
But you have to do that mistake in order to stop towing dinghies.
Yeah, I did that one big time. So.
All right, so the inverse, I'm not sure this counts, August, because it wasn't on purpose, but the next question here was, what are some of the most creative solutions that you've come up with to solve problems on a passage? So that was maybe a drogue, but maybe not intentional. Do you guys have any thoughts on when you had to get creative when something went wrong and you managed to fix it?
I have one that worked temporarily a couple of times, and it had to do with the macerator. The first mistake was not having a spare.
They're always toilet problems. Those are the best.
Terrible.
They're always the most creative when the heads are clogged.
Not having
high stakes.
A spare macerator on the boat, or a spare toilet. Just to carry a whole spare toilet on the boat. Not having a spare macerator, and the on the inside of the electrical engine, the teeth, the magnetic teeth that go around were actually worn away so much that it wasn't making enough contact and conducting. So we found inside the motor itself there was cracked copper that was spun inside the motor, and we were able to find the right size metal hanger, cut that, and then weld or solder that into the piece, cut off the entire piece of the winding of the inside of the motor, and used the hanger, and it had just enough copper in the hanger that it conducted it and was able to help with the engine or with the motor to blend your stuff for at least like 4 or 5 more flushes, and then it would burn itself out again, and then you try it again and burn it out. So yeah, it's pretty cool to use a coat hanger to actually fix something.
Do you remember, Andy, when we were up in Lunenburg on our first boat, when the alternator bracket broke?
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
That was very creative and then self-inflicted.
Self-inflicted. So, well, there were 2 things that was self-inflicted. The alternator bracket, the part that tensions the belt on the alternator, just cracked in half and was no longer under tension. So we had some spare, just like 1/4-inch aluminum plates like laying around. I don't even know what I had them for, but they're easy to drill. So I basically made like a splint. I drilled the aluminum plate, attached it to one side of the broken bracket, and then holding the belt tension, drilled it in place while the belt was under tension and put another screw in. Well, in the process of drilling it in place, I also drilled a hole through the cooling line. So had to get creative with that too. We had some rubber, great piece of kit, by the way. This rubber self-amalgamating tape is fantastic for rigging stuff and for things like that, because it actually sealed this rubber cooling hose and lasted until we changed the engine like 3 years later. But I'll let you, it look like you want to talk here, August, with a creative solution. I've got another poop story that I just have to tell. Because, yeah, it's a good one. But go ahead, August.
I think once I was struggling to find like a vacuum leak because I had engine trouble. Like the engine wouldn't suck in raw cooling water because there was a vacuum leak somewhere in the system, and I couldn't run my engine. I was on a lee shore, slowly drifting towards some rocks, and I just grabbed like a roll of cling wrap out of the galley, like wrapped the entire line, like the raw water filter, the impeller housing, all the pipes, everything in cling wrap, and sure enough, it worked. Yeah.
That would be something for the next owner to find.
No, I did. It lasted me until, like, I went straight to the dock and pulled everything apart and repaired it properly. But yeah.
So here's the one that you might actually take home with you. This is, the worst problems are the toilet problems, and like we didn't talk about this in the what matters, what doesn't matter. Pooping really matters, and how your plumbing's set up really matters, because when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. So we were on Eastbjorn 2017, sailing from the Azores up to Ireland, and we were early, so we stopped in the Aran Islands, which is, actually we're going to Scotland. We stopped off in the Aran Islands, which is in the west part of Galway Bay in the west coast of Ireland. Beautiful, beautiful anchorage, beautiful day, and we get in, we get to anchor, and someone's down below using the head, and like you can see like on the holding tank vent, which is at like deck level, there's like liquid coming out of the holding tank vent, and I'm like, oh no. There's only one thing that can mean, and it's the tank's clogged. It's like, oh, crap, literally. And so I said to everyone, okay, get the dinghy. Everyone that's on the boat, you're all going ashore. I took them ashore in the dinghy because they weren't going to come back on the boat until I had this fixed. I needed everyone gone. So me and I stayed on the boat. But the problem now is we're in this anchorage in the middle of nowhere. There's no pump-out facilities, and the holding tank's full. And for me to get to the clog, which was like in the piping, I had to take the whole thing apart, but I couldn't take it apart or it was going to drain into the bilge. I'm positive you guys have one of these stories on DELOS as well that drained into the bilge. So we're like, how do we get this shit out of the shit tank without a pump out? So I was like, all right, well, can we make our own pump out? So we have a big emergency bilge pump that we keep. It's like mounted on a board and has like a 2-foot handle that you like do like this and a long hose. So Mia puts the rubber gloves on. We open the deck valve where you normally pump out. She takes the rubber hose and like kind of sticks it on top of there as best she can with a seal. And meanwhile, there's no hose on the outlet. It's just like an opening. So I mount the board on the side of the boat and like, pumping up the pressure and then, firing the hole, and you're just spraying shit out into the anchorage. We were the only boat in the anchorage, thankfully, but we were on this touristy island. There was a ferry that would go by every hour or so. And the ferry, and I was like, okay, stop, and wave to the ferry, and then, okay, right. And it's like, big shit, and there was a little bit of wind, so the shit's just like spraying down the side of the boat.
And to top it off, it was our wedding anniversary that day. I was like, I love you, but I hate this.
But it worked. It did work. We actually emptied the tank. I took the whole thing apart, found the clog, put it back together. And it did work. We didn't fill the bilge with poop, and it was a successful day. August, I think you just recently did that again successfully, but not maybe in that same method.
I did, yeah. No, I did not have to deploy the poop cannon strategy.
Okay, there was a couple people that asked about, we'll totally change gears here. A couple people that asked about sailing with kids, and I know, Heather, you, as we said, you raised your kids on boats. So how did you do that? Because I have a 4-year-old, and Mia asked a question once to like a Facebook group. What do you do? Like, how do you go sailing with a 2-year-old? What are the tips? And everyone's like, don't.
Yeah, I mean, there are certain ages where it's really great, and there are certain ages where it's really hard, and 2 is really hard. But I pretty much, my kids lived in tethers, and they were tethered to the boat at all times. And I was outnumbered, so I had 2 kids, 2 kids in diapers at the same time, which was tough. And but having that experience actually like forced me to get them involved. That I had to make sure that they could do everything they could do to help. So in a lot of ways, it was good because I started to learn that they could do a whole lot more than they think they can, or you think they can at that age. And then you're raising really capable kids, and they turned out to be, they're turning out to be really capable kids. And I think just get them involved. I mean, they're part of the crew. Get them doing everything they can possibly do. You can we had these like cool little pumpkin carving knives that weren't actually sharp. You couldn't actually cut yourself with them. And I had my kids at 2 years old helping cook dinner, and so you just sort of adapt the situation to what they're capable of, but just also think that they're probably capable of more than what most people give their kids in America these days credit for. And they just integrate. I think kids are so adaptable, and they integrate into whatever you're doing, as long as you include them in everything that you're doing, to the extent that you can. And I think also, in terms of raising kids on board, it's helpful that you're already in a very stimulating environment. You just don't need a lot of stuff. There is always something to do around a boat. And kids can become friends with adults. Kids can be friends with all age other kids. They don't have to necessarily be with their peer groups if you encourage them and you model that for them. So, get in the dinghy, go to the other boats nearby, whether they have kids on board or not. You may find a pair of grandparents that are missing their grandkids, and they're happy to sit with your kid and teach them a skill that you don't have. And it's great. It's an incredibly cool community that way. And to this day, my kids still, my kids have friends that are 80-year-olds, and they have friends that are much younger than them, and it just works. So include them in everything as best you can.
And Mia, we're doing sort of the opposite, where we have our own family boat at home with Axel, but we don't really include him in work because it would be impossible to run the trip. So maybe Mia, you can just talk to how we've decided to do it by separating work but also having his boat.
Yeah, but for us it's impossible to take him on the passages because I don't think you guys would like to have 4-year-old Axel with you, and it would be impossible for us to have him with us on passages. So we have a family boat in Sweden and go cruising now, and for us it's just being patient and flexible with the schedule and like taking days as they come. And in the past, maybe me and Andy really enjoyed doing like a really long day sail, but we do shorter hops with him now. We go ashore, let him run around, and it was quite funny last summer. We had him on the boat for a week, and we stopped in place in Sweden where you kind of have rocks and forest, where you can't really run, but you can climb and explore. And then on day 6, we went to a place where they had roads, and he literally ran for like 3 hours. He could not stop running. And you just realize how much energy the kids have. So like trying to make them, if they are energy kids, just find places, if you go cruising, for them to release energy.
And August, you literally live on an island, and I know you haven't had your kids on the big sailboat much yet, but how do you manage it?
Yeah, I've had my kids out on Eastbjorn twice. Just like we hadn't had the sails up because I have a 2-year-old and an 8-month-old, and it's that is tough. But my 2-year-old loves it. Like he thinks it's great just being on the boat. Just like you said, Heather. There's so many fun things to do. Like the little hatches that you can go and look through, and all these little cubbies and stuff. But it's really amazing, like how fast they learn. We also have a little fishing boat, like a 12-foot fiberglass boat with a 6 horsepower outboard on it that we take out fishing and stuff. And I take my 2-year-old out in that often, and he knows everything. That's good. He calls the orders now. After the first time we were out, he's like, start the engine, get the fenders in, get the lines. And he knows the exact procedures for everything. He loves it. So it's really, it's a really fun thing to get them involved and see them, sharing this joy that we have for the water. It's really cool.
One of the little tips I'll give for having young kids on board, which it can be extremely hard. At that age, because you've got to constantly watch them, and they're curious enough to want to do things, but don't have enough fear yet to know what they can and cannot do. One of the things that I did I was a single mom actually with the 2 kids, and I would go in the evening after I put them to bed, and I'd sail through the night. And then they'd wake up in a new place the next day, and it was really magical. And they were just hooked on that. They loved getting up and going, like, where are we?
So just never sleep is what you're saying.
Well, but it actually would work out in my favor a lot of the time, because I could go to the beach. They'd run off all their energy and do their crazy running and jumping and all of that, and I'd just sit there and relax and kind of like read my book and do my knitting and like have my time to decompress after an overnight. And then after a while, we got to the point where the kids were starting to want to take watches. And they really wanted to do it, and it was great. I remember after sailing with them for quite a while, and maybe my oldest was like 9 and a 7-year-old, I invited my mom to come and visit us, and we were down and going around Cabo. And sometimes when you round the bottom of the Baja Peninsula, you run into this like pretty extreme, sudden chop current, wind against waves. The sea builds up really steep and really close together really fast. And the kids had been sailing with me their whole lives, and they were used to all of it. It didn't faze them at all. My mom, on the other hand, was really seasick. All of a sudden, she just like, the color just went, and I was looking at her like, oh no. And so we, I tried to give her some, we tried all the things to keep her from getting really sick, and she just kept going over the side, vomiting. And I thought, okay, this is getting really bad. We're gonna get to the point of severe dehydration here pretty soon. And I looked at her and I said, Mom, do you wanna turn around and go back to Cabo? And she's like, and the kids just look at me and go, that's an option? Well, you guys are fine. It's clearly not a safety issue for you, but it's a safety issue for Nana, so. Yeah, so you go at their pace, I think, is really the key to it, and do what you can do, what you can handle. For me, sailing at night was actually easier on my body and my, safety sense, because I knew they were down below sleeping, and I could handle the boat, solo for a night and then catch up on sleep later.
That's cool. All right. Brady, I'm going to give this one to you. Actually, this is a question that I have as well, but it's like two parts to this. You go to different places. How do you source and select marinas and planning? Like, we're going to the Pacific for the first time. Never been there. I've been spending a lot of my time trying to answer this question. Is it all word of mouth, or are there tricks to finding good quality places for work and to leave the boat? That was another question, was about like, how far in advance do you have to plan, because you guys are sailing seasonally, to like, okay, where am I leaving the boat at the end of this year? We have a similar thing with Falcon. Like, we know the boat's going to sit in San Francisco for 3 months, but we don't know where yet. So how do you guys do that?
Yeah, I think the resources are constantly changing. One that has been tried and true throughout the years is a website called Noonsite. Noonsite's a great resource for planning your adventures. You can go to a location or a specific country. It'll give you logistics on how to check into that country, what paperwork is needed, any notices if there's crime, and then marinas and stuff like that. Beyond that, cruising guides. Like plan ahead of time, so buy cruising guides for the area that you're going. There's a cruising guide for every single place. It was, cruising guides were the initial like YouTube of sailing. Everyone that went sailing wrote a cruising guide about it. So there's constant good information in cruising guides of certain areas. And then beyond that, I do a ton of research on Google Earth too. Like I'll just kind of look around at different areas, and if you go up and spend hours just going up and down the coast at a level where you can see what's happening, and you're like, hey, that kind of looks like a marina. And then you can kind of slowly start going. If you know the wind patterns, you can know what's going to be a protected anchorage during that time of year and do your research that way. So I would say those three would be the ways that we do it.
Have you found like a trick for finding, like, because there is so a variety of like, well, these guys are great and this place sucks.
Yeah.
Like, how do you know? I
don't know. That's a really good question. It's kind of you'll know before you get there, I guess. The closer you get, you'll talk to people who have been there. I think those things you'll never know ahead of time unless you've really got firsthand knowledge of somebody that's been there. There are reviews on Noonsite too on different things, but it's a lot like Yelp. Like a lot of people only say negative things. They don't share a lot of positive things with a lot of stuff. So stuff like that. But really, all of the stuff that we've been told to avoid has come from firsthand talking to other people that have been there or other cruisers. I guess there's other ways nowadays too. I mean, sailors love Facebook groups. So if you don't have Facebook, start a Facebook account and just use it for sailing. And you can, like for the Sea of Cortez, for example, there's a Sea of Cortez Sailors Facebook group. So you can go in there and be like, hey, does anybody know anything about this marina? Or I'm looking for a place that's cheap to do this, or a woodworker or a metal worker. And you'll get 20, 30 responses on input on where to take your boat and where to get stuff done. So Facebook is a great resource.
I think the word of mouth thing though is true. Like we're going to Mexico for the first time, and I emailed you guys, and Blue sent me like 4 pages. Like, here's all these cool places. Here's the thing, and you actually helped us plan our schedule because I didn't even know about what is it, Ensenada? You're like, yeah, Ensenada's really cool. Go there. I was like, oh yeah, I can go there. Cool, thank you. So that is actually really good. That's probably the best way to do it. And we also I've spent tons of time on Noonsite now for the South Pacific and figuring all this stuff out. Mia, you look like you
one
want to say
great Facebook group is called Women Who Sail. And that's, if you're not part of it, if you're a woman, it's a really good resource. Every time when I have a question for the sailing community, I pop it in there, and you get 10 really good, accurate answers, because it's literally people from all over the world in that group. Like one time we were in Portugal, and you could not find gas to fill up propane, and the marina said you couldn't, the gas station said you couldn't, and I was like, it gotta be a way for us to fill up these foreign tanks. Sure enough, I asked the Women Who Sail, and they gave me a GPS location of a little gas station 45 minutes away, non-descriptive, Pedro's the gas, blah blah blah. That's where the truck went. All the trucks went there to fill up their propane, and that's where I went, and it went smooth, and 10 minutes later we were done. And no one in the marine industry in Portugal said we could do it. So if you're a woman who are not part of that group yet, join, and it's a perfect resource because it's so accurate. And it's not a lot of, some Facebook group tend to be a lot of armchair sailors sitting in it, but I feel like the Women Who Sail group is very accurate.
I think on the other end too, don't let it debilitate you of over planning. I mean, for Andy's business and our business, we have to know where the boat's going so we can tell people where to go. But for the average cruiser, this kind of stuff will fall into place as you get closer. So by no means do you need to plan out every single stop along the way and research every single anchorage. Just know the general direction you're going, and when you get there, you'll find whatever you want to go to the right place. So you'll meet the right people at the right time, and then you'll go to the right place.
Yeah, the only thing you need to remember though is what kind of visas you need and how long you can stay, that kind of planning. Because for example, as a foreigner, if you're going to the US, as you found out, August, I think, or your friends, you cannot go to the US as a sailor without a B1, B2 visa that you have to get from the embassy. So if you're in the BVI and popping over to US Virgin Island, you can't just do that as a non-American. So knowing what kind of visas you need in different places.
Yeah, I was arrested in Puerto Rico when I arrived on my sailboat without I had the ESTA thing, but yeah, that doesn't work if you arrive on a sailboat. So yeah, that was those kind of things. Noonsite's great to look into, get all that stuff.
I would also encourage people to anchor out and not go to marinas as much as possible. Like in the years that I lived on DELOS, we probably went to, I don't know, a handful of marinas, but we always tried to anchor out. Again, with the business, we do go in because it's easier and all this stuff, but generally there's a safe anchor right around the corner, Anchorage, and you can go there, go check out the marina if you want to, or poach their shower and laundry and whatnot. But yeah, go anchor out and enjoy it. And living at the marina is not really nice. You're never in the right wind direction if it's hot.
Well, we even do that often on Falcon. Like we'll drop the crew off, clean the boat up, and then go back to anchor because it's just so much more pleasant. But if we have a week between trips or something, just like okay, we're back on anchor just for fun. All right, couple of specific. We're getting close to the end of the time here, but a couple of specific questions. How do you guys deal with? I know this maybe is a question for me. They ask, what's the ideal solution for glasses? Can't see up close or far away. Glasses are tough. I wear contact lenses, but offshore contacts are a pain in the ass because like you're sleeping at weird times, you're awake at weird times. So I guess the simple answer is have several pairs. Stupid things we've done, dropping glasses over the side for sure. Mia, you have to say something.
No, and me and Vince had a conversation on Transatlantic about subscription. What do you call them? Prescription, not subscription. Prescription sunglasses, and how important, how good that is, and that changed my life. To like be able to just put my sunglasses on and see instead of have to pop my contacts in and out in the daytime. So getting 2 pair of those, I think, is the key for offshore sailing.
Brady?
Has anybody got LASIK?
Well,
have you considered it?
I wish. I've been tempted to do that. I just haven't done it.
Yeah, I got mine done in Cape Town, and
really,
yeah, it turned out great. There was an issue. There was a small issue during the surgery. They give you Valium and whatever else to kind of calm you down, and he did my right eye first, and everything went perfect. And the left eye, I don't know if you know how LASIK works, but basically they hold nobody's gonna get LASIK after the story. They hold your eyeball open, and then they put a suction on your eyeball so you physically can't move your eyeball. It's stronger than your eye muscles. And then they cut a flap of your cornea, they flip it open, and they put a laser to reshape the inside of your eye, and then they flap it closed, and then it's done. It takes like 10 minutes to do. Right eye went great, left eye, suction was on. As they were cutting the top of my cornea off, the suction came loose, and the whole top of my eyeball got cut off. And the doctor was basically like, oh, shit. And you're like, oh, man, what's going on? And he's like, well, he kind of told me what happened. And he's like, either I can laser it now and just kind of put it back in place and hope for the best, or you'll just have one eye done. So I ended up having him just do the work, and he put it back in, and it healed great. So it's a good story at the end. But
yeah, thanks for that.
When I met Brady, he was actually wearing an eye patch.
Pirate Brady.
Oh, that's even worse than the poop stories. That's horrible.
It's like 1 in 20,000 chance that happens, so don't worry about it.
I have the perfect solution. My eyesight is terrible, but I wear these like 30-day night lenses. I just put them in, forget about them for a month, and then just swap them out once a month.
Oh, I don't
Works
like
great.
that. I couldn't do that. I'm happy for you though, August. All right, let's end this on a high note here. I'm gonna go down the row here. August, we'll start with you. And I want you to say, you can answer one of 2 questions. What was your favorite passage, or what was your favorite destination?
I think my favorite destination is Fair Isle out in the North Sea. It is a gorgeous place. It's right between the Orkney Islands and the Shetlands, and it's a tiny island with very, very few inhabitants, tons of seabirds, especially puffins.
It's like puffin heaven.
Puffin heaven, and you can climb this little hill with all the puffin burrows. The puffins burrow, like they have little holes in the ground where they live. You can just sit there, watch the sunset, and all the puffins will come in from the sea and like go down into their little burrows right around where you're sitting, and it's really fantastic. I think that's probably my favorite.
Yeah, that's a unique place.
I also, maybe not my all-time favorite, but it's up there for sure. How about you, Mia? Favorite passage or favorite destination?
It's so hard because so many different places, but I think Svalbard must be the most beautiful and unique place we've ever been to. And I think the passage up there was so rewarding because you're in the northern Norway and you're going 600 miles due north to get there, and then making landfall there just felt so spectacular. And just that playground we had up there was just ridiculous. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. So that must be definitely up the most beautiful and unique.
Cool. How about you, Heather?
That's a hard one. Definitely the best destination was arriving in Hawaii. The way that it just kind of, it's sort of like Avatar-ish, and the formation of the volcanic islands and how they just fall into the sea, and then the color of the ocean is really spectacular. And I think the best time on passage I ever had was actually sailing a very small boat from Woods Hole to Martha's Vineyard. We, as a kid, we basically sailed a dinghy with a friend, which is, I don't recommend that, stupid. But we carried the dinghy through the woods to get down to this beach where we were launching, and there were fireflies in the woods, and it was really spectacular night for fireflies. And then we pushed the dinghy into the water, and there's phosphorescence in the water. So the forest is glowing, then the ocean's glowing, then we're sailing out, and we're leaving this beautiful blue trail behind us of phosphorescence, and these dolphins came. And they're in our bow, and then the stars come out, and there's no moon. I'm like, wow, this whole world is magic. But yeah, that was a really special passage.
I think one of my favorite passages led to one of my favorite destinations, so it's kind of all in one. It's specifically from the northern side of Madagascar to South Africa. And you go through the Mozambique Channel to do this, and there's a couple of atolls in the Mozambique Channel that nobody goes to, and they're renowned for shipwrecks, for scuba diving. And we specifically routed our way so we could anchor behind. There's no land, it's just an atoll. So we left Madagascar, had a beautiful downwind sail to this atoll, anchored on the protected side of it, and spent the entire day scuba diving on these old cannons and crazy. There's a lot of people that still go there to treasure hunt, so we were trying to find stuff, but spent the whole day scuba diving this amazing remote location that hasn't been touched by people, and then left that following evening and continued on. And then you get into the Agulhas Current, and the Agulhas Current runs 5 knots from north to south. We had 25 knots of northerly wind behind us, and we were doing 12, 15 knots speed over ground, just flying along. And then you arrive in a country where right down the road from the first marina we went to were giraffes and elephants and all this crazy shit. So it was a special, very relaxing passage with a dive in between, and then a natural zoo on the other end. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I had to think about this question for a long time last night. I was laying in bed. It kind of kept me up. It's hard to decide. But I think one that stands out for me is when we left Ascension Island, which is pretty much in the middle of the Atlantic between South America and Africa. And we were heading to southern Brazil, so it was over 2,000 nautical miles. And of course, we pull out of the anchorage, and our autopilot breaks immediately. And we didn't have a backup on board at that time. So. It was broken. I'm like, why didn't we fix that? Anyways, we had 6 crew, so maybe we weren't that motivated, and we just decided to hand steer. But yeah, hand steering that 2,000 nautical miles was so special, and we don't push ourselves to do that, I think, that much anymore. And
Sail with us more often.
I was wondering when I was thinking of the story, do you guys hand steer in all your passages?
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. So yeah, I would say I probably really learned to sail on that passage, and we just were sailing to the Southern Cross and being out in the middle of the Atlantic, and the stars that you see, it's pretty fantastic, and just felt so connected. Never felt so connected to nature. With every little swell that comes through, you feel it in your hands, and yeah, super special. So encourage everyone to turn off the autopilot as much as possible too.
I'll instead of giving a specific passage or destination, I don't think you, Heather, properly talked about how cool it is when you get dolphins with phosphorescence. We call them electric dolphins. And like that, when that happens, it's pretty rare, but it happens often enough that like that's my favorite time, when it's a dark, overcast night, lots of phosphorescence, and all of a sudden you got these torpedoes just streaking through the water with a comet tail. I mean, it is truly, truly magical. And it's really cool. Axel, his favorite movie is Moana. And I think the movie, even though it's a cartoon, does a really, really, really good job of when she's on the boat at night and the stars come down to the horizon and stuff. It looks fantastical, but that's actually how it feels. The movie does a really good job of enunciating that like feeling of what it's out there, even though it doesn't actually look like that. That's what it feels like, and that's just impossible. No matter how much pictures we show you or words we tell you, you can't describe that feeling, and that's because you're like also sleep deprived. You're maybe a little seasick. You're in this weird mental state, and you're disconnected from everything. That you're in this weird mental state that you can't replicate here, but you get it there, and then you get that on top of it, and it's like very spiritual. There's no other way to put it, really. And I guess that's a great place to end. So thank you to the panelists. Thank you guys for listening to this. Thanks to Ramshead for hosting us, and to Aiden and Patrick for live streaming, and those of you that are watching on YouTube, thanks for that. And we'll leave you guys to it. One quick thing I wanted to say: Jim Butler, stand up. Jim is our best and longest crew member. He sailed over 15,000 miles with 59 North. He has offered, there's several other alumni from 59 North and from you guys in the room, so we can be in here for a little bit longer. Jim has offered, if anybody's interested in learning more about what it's like to sail with us, or if any of you guys want to meet up, we can hang out for a few minutes, and Jim has offered to press you into service. And if anybody else wants to meet up with Jim, he'd love to meet other 59 North crew. Oh yeah, thanks Aiden. The party tonight at J-World, 5 p.m. If you didn't sign up, you can just show up. It's $20 at the door, beer and hot dogs and stuff, and that goes to Matt. So, all right. Thank you very much, guys. Whoa.